Hello dear viewers, support me by subscribing to my channel and share my video if you like it, and also make sure you comment your thoughts. Now let's start the video. Ep9 Shu. Victarion had given the brave, but foolish scholars the rest of the night in the aftermath of the attack to reconsider his generous offer. He had assumed that they would do what all sheep do, give in to the demands of the wolf, but it seems one particular sheep was no sheep at all. Terry the Fat Maester in training had managed to hold the citadel through 4 attempts by the Ironborn to take it. Before each assault, Victarion had gone to that opening in the doors and had spoken to the younger man, offering him a chance to open the doors, and each time he had been rejected. Victarion respected the man's courage. In the face of overwhelming odds and against actual warriors, he had managed to withstand the Ironborn, using tricks and deception. In the 4th and latest attack, Victarion's men had made it inside the citadel, but it had been a trap as they had found themselves herded under the globe-shaped chandelier, which had been dropped on the unsuspecting raiders. Some 200 men had been killed or injured as the maesters managed to drive the confused raiders back out of the doors, shutting and boarding them up once again. Perhaps the Ironborn were taking the scholars too lightly. After all, they were not trained warriors, but they always managed to be one step ahead of Victarion's men, luring them into traps, confusing and tricking them before pushing them back out of their home, fighting with fury that surprised even Victarion. It was the fury of the desperate. So far, after 4 days, Victarion had lost around 600 men to the brave and foolish scholars, though they themselves have not gotten off without their own losses. Victarion wasn't sure how many were left, but they were surely running out of tricks. Sooner or later the Ironborn would break through those doors and every single maester in there would be put to the sword. The rest of the city had been well and truly plundered. Everything that of value that hadn't been nailed down was now safely aboard a ship, along with salt wives and thralls. During the battle and in the day following, at least half of the women in the city had been raped, while many of the men had been killed. The Starry Septon was a smoking pile of ash, and the bank was nothing but a large coffin full of corpses that used to be bankers. The only structure in the town that hadn't been touched was the high tower itself. One of Victarion's braver captains had led 2 ships in an attempt to try and take the ancient lighthouse, but they had all been killed, and their ships had been set aflame. It was a clear message to Victarion: the city hasn't been fully taken, not while the high tower stood. Lord Captain, Lord Sparry greeted grimly as he and others prepared to attack the citadel. The sun had just risen in the east, and Victarion was preparing for his morning discussion with Samwell Tarly. "Spera," Victarion grunted. Striding past the man, when he reached the opening in the doors, he knocked. "Terra." "Lord Victarion," was the response, as the Fat Maester showed himself. He had a bandage around his head, and his face was dusted with dirt and blood, but he still looked just as resolute as the last time Victarion had seen him. In one hand he held an Ironborn axe. "Are you ready to accept my generous offer?" Victarion asked, crossing his arms. Tarly shook his head. "You best leave when you can. King Robb has no doubt heard of your attack, and a force is being assembled as we speak to take the city back." "Our business isn't finished," Sparrow shouted from behind Victarion. "I want my fucking son back. Our prisoners are being treated fairly. Their wounds have been seen to and they have been fed." Tarly answered firmly, crossing his arms. "I assume the same isn't happening with the poor souls in the city."
"The old way is clear," Victarion started.
"The old way is barbaric," Tarly snapped. "Killing defenseless women, children, and men. Where's the honor in that?" "What would you know about war, boy?" Sparrow snarled, walking up next to Victarion. "You look like you spend more time around the dinner table than in the training yard." "My father is Randyll Tarly." Tarly shrugged. "If there's one thing I know, it's war." Victarion gazed at the boy, knowing it was a lie. He was putting on a show for the others. He was being brave in the face of 2 men who could cut him down, as easy as cutting into a meat pie. The boy was no warrior, nor was he a strategist, but he was brave. That much was clear. He fought and he inspired others around him to never give up. There was steel in him that Victarion couldn't help but respect.
"We paid the iron price."
"There is your honor," Victarion answered. "Now will you open your doors?" Tarly shook his head. "Never. Not to the likes of you." "Why, you little," Sparrow roared, moving forward while one hand went to his axe. but Victarion grabbed him by the shoulder and pushed him back. "Enough!" the Lord Captain of the Iron Fleet roared. "Get the men ready to attack." Spar glared once more at the fat maester before stalking off, shouting orders for men to prepare for the assault. Victarion's raiders looked tired and worn, their constant defeats at the hands of the scholars taking away from the victorious high they had when they had taken the city. They did not look happy to be attacking the citadel, and there were rumors that the maesters were using magic. It was all nonsense to Victarion. "Lord Victarion," Tarly said, sounding much closer. Victarion turned back towards the door to find Tarly standing nearly as close to the hole as he was. Now he got a better look at the man who had turned back 4 Ironborn assaults. He was a fat man in his early 20s with a scraggly beard and thinning brown hair. He had a slight slump in his posture, an almost defeated or worried look on his face, but in his eyes was firm resolution behind terror. He was scared, but he wasn't a coward. Once again, Victarion couldn't help but respect the man. "Think about what will happen if you destroy the citadel," Tarly continued. "Centuries of knowledge are housed here. This is the center of learning in all of the known world. Leave us be. If you kill us, then you destroy an institution that allows houses to message between themselves. You are killing generations of healers, teachers, historians, messengers, and advisors. Masters are essential to Westeros." "Then give up your jewels," Victarion replied. Tarly shook his head. "I cannot. The citadel does not keep wealth for purely monetary purposes. They are used for scientific research and for forging chains. They will be put to good use here instead of collecting dust in your chests." He raised his hands in a pleading gesture. "Surely you see that there's no point in taking the citadel. You think you can appeal to my better nature." Victarion snorted. "I am an Ironborn lad. I take what I want with the iron price." Tarly shook his head. "Your brother is said to be a man who is lost in despair because of his failed rebellion years ago. The Damfair is said to be a godly fanatic. Euron is nothing." Victarion snapped. "He is nothing," Sam agreed, taking a step back out of fear. "You followed your brothers loyally into one rebellion, and look at what it cost you. Now you do so again thinking that it will be different. Choose your own path." "What do you know of choosing your own path?" Victarion snarled, annoyed that the maester was trying to lecture him like he was a child. He was the Lord Captain of the Iron Fleet. He knew exactly who he was. "My father is one of the foremost commanders in all the realm, and is currently besieging Casterly Rock, and yet here I am in the citadel." Sam replied calmly, backing away from the door. "Perhaps it's a good thing too." With that, Tarly returned to the safety of the barricade, leaving an annoyed and furious Victarion behind. The Lord Captain returned to his men, one hand gripping the haft of his axe. He had half a mind to break the door down and kill the Tarly boy himself, but he held himself back. Like all captains, Victarion held his emotions in check and looked to be in total command of himself and situation. Spare, on the other hand, was pacing like a caged lion in front of the 200 Ironborn, making exels with his sword as he loosed up his arms. "Lord Spare," Victarion called, about to give the order to attack, when a raider came sprinting down the street, his face red and dripping with sweat. "Lord Captain," he cried when he saw Victarion. "They're here." "Who?" Victarion barked. "Reachman," the raider answered. "Thousands of them." Victarion shared a glance with Spare and began to march towards the city walls. "Get every man to the walls now." "What about the maesters?" one raider asked. Victarion grabbed the man by the front of his armor and pulled him forward till their faces were a few inches apart. "Fuck the bloody maesters," Rickon hissed, throwing the man on his ass. "All of you, spread word through the town. Everyone get to the walls." The 200 raiders nodded and began to run in different directions, shouting at the tops of their lungs. Victarion and Lord Spar made their way towards the walls, where there was even more activity happening. Victarion had left great and good brother, heir to Hammerhorn, in command of the walls. He knew that the Lords of the Reach would put together a force to fight the Ironborn. Depending on the size of the force, Victarion would then decide to fight or retreat. Assaulting the citadel had caused Victarion to stay longer than he wanted to, but he couldn't allow the scholars to outlast him and his men. He had sworn after the first failed assault to stay in the city until men finally breached the fucking building. Now a Reach army was outside the walls. It took a few minutes for Victarion to reach the walls, fighting against the river of warriors as they ran, armed and armored, to man the defenses. When he finally arrived, he marched up the steps and soon found the loud young man shouting and cursing, shoving men into position. "Graydon," Victarion said, approaching Gorold's son. "Lord Captain," Graydon responded, nodding to Victarion. "Just as you said, it's an army of the Reach." The Crystorian looked out over the walls and repressed a curse. There had to be close to 10,000 men marching in formation towards the walls. Blocks of infantry marched with their shields up, while loose groups of archers walked behind them for support. On the flanks, wedge-shaped companies of cavalry rode easily, their lances and armor shining in the morning sun. Victarion did not recognize many of the banners that flew over the army, but there was one he did. It was a golden rose on a field of green, the sigil of House Tyrell. "What are we going to do?" Graydon asked. "We'll head back to the ships," Victarion growled. "Barricade the gates and leave the city." "That's no longer an option," Lord Drum said grimly, marching up the steps, followed by dozens of raiders. "We've been cut off." "What do you mean?" Lord Sparrow cried. "Look," Drum said, gesturing with his sword towards the harbor, where a giant cloud of black smoke was rising from where Victarion had left his ship. "I had the ships inspected at sunrise, just as the Lord Captain ordered, and some men found barrels of oil and tar spilled on the decks. The ships soon showed up and fired flaming arrows at us. The fires started on a few ships, but soon spread to others." "How did that happen?" Graydon asked. "Euron had men sneak onto ships using rafts to spread oil and tar," Victarion said grimly. "It's the same bloody tactic we used at Lansport." "So what now?" Graydon asked again. "Drum, how many men do you have with you?" Victarion barked, turning back to the Lord of Old Wyke. "I left about 200 with my boy back at the harbor," Drum answered. "Other than that, I have everyone I could find." Victarion immediately began barking out orders like he was back on his ship. "Graydon, you're in charge of the archers. As soon as the Reachmen are in range, fire at will on them," he said. "The rest of you, gather all our men and bring them to the main gate. Those fuckers want to fight. We'll give them one." The Ironborn nobles around Victarion nodded and ran off, but Victarion grabbed Drum before he could leave. "Take a few hundred men and grab as many ships as you can get your hands on. Rafts, boats, barges, I don't care. Take them through the river gate," he ordered. Drum nodded and ran off, the raiders who he had brought following him. After an hour, the defenders were ready. The enemy were in place, and the archers had been exchanging fire for some time. Graydon had cursed and barked at his men for about 10 minutes before getting an arrow in his side. He wasn't dead, but it had certainly shut him up. His brother Gormund was now in command of the archers. While the archers were fighting, someone had retrieved Victarion's shield and helm. He was already in his armor, with his gold cloak over his shoulders. Now with Sperry and Garld Goodbrother at his side, along with about 9,000 Ironborn raiders, he was ready. "Open the gates," he shouted, looking up at the gatehouse. A raider nodded and echoed the order. Soon the wooden doors slowly swung open, and the iron portcullis rose, leaving a clear road towards the Reachmen infantry. The raiders began to move forward, but Victarion stopped them. "What is dead may never die," he bellowed, lifting his helm so that he could be heard clearly. "But rises again, harder and stronger, to the drowned god." "The drowned god," the raiders echoed as Victarion led the charge out of the gate. The men of the Reach had been peppered with arrows, but they still managed to lock shields and lower their spears at the sight of Victarion and his men charging out of the main gate, racing up the Rose Road at them. One man, an older, portly man wearing ornate silver armor and seated on a fine white charger, called orders to his men, seemingly trying to inspire them. The infantry cheered half-heartedly. Then another fellow came forward, bearing a tabard with a green apple. He shouted at the men, getting a better cheer from them. Victarion raised his shield as a wave of arrows arced down on his men. The cries of the wounded and dying soon filled the air as the deadly rain continued, but most raiders followed Vicarion's example and raised their shields, weathering the arrow fire. "Fuck 'em bloody," Goodbrother roared excitedly, waving his axe over his head. The two forces came together in a crash of metal and bodies as the Ironborn formed a wedge with Victarion at its head. tearing into the first body of infantry it met. The Lord Captain of the Iron Fleet chopped off the steel point of one man's spear before burying his axe in the man's skull, kicking the body off as he continued on to his other opponents. Victarion, still annoyed from his conversation with Renly earlier that morning, gave in to the battle rage that came over him. Nothing could stand before him. Every man who did was either buffeted aside by his shield, or felt the cold bite of his axe before falling to the ground. He didn't know friend from foe, and didn't care. He cut down anyone who came towards him. While Victarion fought, the man with the green apple on his tabard brought his right flank of infantry and cavalry down on Victarion's men, forcing them towards the river, where Drum and his men were fighting a losing battle. He had led his men out of the river gate, just as Victarion had instructed, and had slammed into the backs of the reachmen. The plan had worked for a few minutes, but the infantry had soon realized what was happening, and turned around to fight Drum's men, and with the help of armored cavalry, they had turned the tide on the Lord of Old Wyke. The Ironborn were segmented into two parties. Victarion and the bulk of his force was in a giant circle of silver, with infantry surrounding 3/4 of his men and cavalry at his back. Drum was pressed against the river with infantry on his right, and cavalry on his left. All the while, the enemy archers were raining arrows down on both Ironborn armies. The Ironborn archers tried desperately to provide support for their comrades, but they were running out of arrows much faster than the reachmen. Garald, good brother, went down under a swarm of spears and swords on Victarion's right, but the large man didn't seem to care, seeking out more enemies to kill. Spar had died earlier in the battle, killed when a pike was shoved through his chest. Now Victarion was alone, a single Ironborn surrounded by dozens of corpses, and a ring of nervous reachmen, all with spears and swords pointed at the giant man. "Come on!" Victarion roared, ripping off his helm and tossing it away, same with his shield. He swung his axe with both hands. "Surrender, Sarah!" the portly man demanded, riding through the ranks of infantrymen, the other man right behind him. "Never!" Victarion growled, setting his feet. The portly man drew his sword and dismounted, marching towards Victarion. The other man seemed to be caught by surprise by the action. "My lord," he cried. "It's fine, Sir John." The other man responded, closing the visor on his helm, and bringing up his shield. "I will deal with this brute." Victarion growled like a wounded bear, and swung his axe with everything he had. The man deflected the attack with his shield, lunging with his own sword and managing to strike the Ironborn captain in the ribs, cracking two under his armor. Victarion grunted and stepped back, feeling pain every time he breathed. He growled and attacked again, his axe a blur of silver. His opponent moved back slowly, dodging and deflecting the axe while his men watched with awed silence. The two warriors battled for a few moments before Victarion intentionally swung for the man's shield, his axe tearing through the thin layer of steel and into the wood beneath. The other man cried out in pain as his gauntlet crumpled under the axe and pierced his hand. He released his shield, his gauntlet a mess of blood and steel that he held close to his body. He was breathing heavy now, sweat pouring out from under his helm. Victarion attempted to shake the ruined shield off of his axe, and became more enraged as he was unable to do so. Finally, he roared and slammed the shield into the nearest thing, which happened to be the other man. The portly warrior was sent reeling, his helmet knocked from his head to reveal sweat-matted curly brown hair and a finely trimmed beard. There was a slight trickle of blood from where the shield had hit his helm. "Max!" the other mounted warrior cried worriedly. "Miklice," Victarion said, the red haze lifting slightly when he heard the name. He stood up a little straighter, his axe falling to his side, the ruined shield sliding off of its head. "Mitch Tiro?" The portly man nodded, glaring at Victarion. "I am." "It will be an honor killing you," Victarion growled, raising his axe. "I am Victarion Greyjoy."
"Then you'll go with me," Mace responded.
The two threw themselves at each other, but within a few moments, everyone knew who was going to win. Mace had been an average warrior in his youth, when he was fitter, but he had given in to the pleasures of the flesh as he had aged, and was no longer in the same fighting shape as his youngest two sons. He had surprisingly held his own against Victarion, but the Ironborn captain was a much better warrior, and in much better shape. Mace managed to dodge Victarion's axe a few times, but the final blow was struck when Victarion feinted an overhead blow, and instead turned the attack into a sideways swing that cleaved through Mace's armor and into his chest, hitting his lungs. The Lord of Highgarden went down with a weak cry, landing on his back as the blow took him off his feet. His men cried out as their lord went down. They had been surprised with his skill and the fact that he had lasted so long against the Ironborn, but his luck had soon caught up to him. Targaryen ripped his axe from Mace's chest, looking around for a new opponent, when he felt a blinding pain in his left knee. Looking down, he saw Mace's sword, struck with the dying man's remaining strength, thrusted cleanly through Targaryen's knee, severing the muscles and bone. The feared Lord Captain of the Iron Fleet bellowed in pain and fell to one knee, dropping his axe in the process. Mace chuckled weakly, red foam coming from his mouth. "I got you," he whispered before going still, his hand falling limply from his sword. Targaryen watched as a line of pikes surrounded him, the man with the green apple striding between them. He moved swiftly and with purpose, ripping the sword from Targaryen's knee and holding it against his neck. "It's fitting that Lord Tyrell's sword should finish the job," the man said grimly. "Any final words?" Targaryen looked down at Mace's body before looking back up at the man. "He fought well." The man nodded and brought the blade back before swinging it at Targaryen's neck. Everything went black after that. "They'll take this one." Jon and the others watched from the entrance of the command tent. As the small army approached, most were on foot, wearing dark leather armor and chainmail, wielding spears and shields, while those on horseback were more heavily armored, wielding lances, swords, and axes. The group riding at the front of the column rode under a banner of a white rose on a field of gray. "The Company of the Rose. What are they doing here?" the Great Chin rumbled. "Perhaps we should talk to them and find out," Howland suggested bluntly. Jon suppressed a smile, wanting to look in command as the sellsword commanders approached. There were a lot of them, nearly 20 or so, but there was one man that surprised Jon. He looked like a Stark, with the same dark hair and long face that Jon's father had. The mounted group was allowed entry into the camp, and soon found themselves face to face with Jon and his commanders. The White Wolf crossed his arms, glancing down at Ghost, who wasn't baring his teeth. That was a good sign for the mystery warriors. "Who are you?" Jon asked, keeping his voice neutral. "I am Darren, captain of the Company of the Rose." The Stark-looking man answered, "These are my commanders." "Why are you here?" Jon asked, as soon as the man was done talking. "That is a long story," Darren answered easily. "Perhaps we could speak alone, myself and your commanders." Jon glanced around at the crowd that was forming, picking out one man. "Roderick, watch the others," he ordered the heir to Ironwrath. "Darren, dismount and come in." The leader of the sellswords slipped from the saddle and followed Jon into the tent, where the others were already retaking their seats. They had just moved on from the rills and were now making plans for relieving Eagle's Roost. The scouts had reported that the keep still held, but it was likely to fall any day now. The council had been debating on whether or not to send Lord Hawker ahead with the entire cavalry to try and break the enemy forces. "Do you have a last name, Darren?" Jon asked, taking his place on the other end of the table from the man, though not sitting down. Ghost remained close to the man, almost prowling around him. The man hesitated before answering. "Perhaps I should tell you why I am here, before I introduce myself fully." Jon raised an eyebrow but nodded. "Very well. Explain." "The Company of the Rose was founded over 300 years ago," Darren started. "It was not formed by men who refused to bend the knee to Aegon Targaryen, but by Eddard Stark himself, after he bent the knee. He was worried that the Targaryen king would go back on his word and burn the north, and so he assembled a group of northerners from every family, second or third sons, cousins in some cases, and created the Company of the Rose. The goal was to preserve family lines should any go extinct." "Hold on," Jon said, holding up a hand. "You're saying that you have Umbers, Glovers, Karstarks, and a member of every noble family in the north in the Company of the Rose?" Darren nodded. "I do," he answered simply. "Mandaleys, Hawkers, Reeds, even extinct houses like Ryders, Fishers, Greenwoods, and others." "Starks?" Jon asked carefully. Darren bowed. Darren Stark, ancestor of Rickon Stark, youngest son of Torrhen Stark, the king who knelt. Now it made sense to Jon why the man looked like a Stark. "So, you're my cousin?" Darren nodded. "I am." For 300 years, the company hid in plain sight in Essos, holding on to the two orders that Torrhen Stark had given them. The first was to stay alive. We took jobs with high chances of victory and were generally known as a solid company. The second order was to return when a Stark once more wore the crown of winter. Jon sighed and ran a hand through his hair. That makes sense. Did you ever keep contact with the North? Daeron nodded. We did, though not with the Stark in Winterfell. The Starks were interconnected with every house in the North, and with everything they had to handle. That responsibility of communication between the North and the company fell to House Reed. All eyes turned to Howland Reed, who casually took a drink of ale. He didn't look at all like he cared about the revelation that had been dropped on the others. House Reed is one of the smallest and strangest houses in the North, and all of Westeros, Howland explained, when he put his tankard down. We were also ideally protected from unwanted eyes and ears because of the neck. My family has always been Lords of Greywater Watch and Spy Master for the Company of the Rose. We have a good system set up too, able to get information within a few days, and even able to pass small packages across Westeros in a matter of days. That's why you said friends, Jon said, remembering his first talk with the man. You said your friends were investigating Winterfell after the Boltons sacked it. Howland nodded. My spies did that. We have a network that expands across Essos and Westeros. We relied on it heavily when choosing contracts, Daeron explained. Now the company has returned to the North to help take it back from the Ironborn and the Boltons before marching south to pledge loyalty to King Robb. Who knows that the company is fighting for him and their history? Howland added. A full report was delivered to Queen Margaery. Jon's head was spinning with the information he was getting. Long-lost members of northern families were returning after being gone for 300 years. He had a cousin, and Howland Reed had a spy network. There was a lot to comprehend, but the story made some kind of sense. Is there anything else I should know? Daeron nodded and produced a scroll from his belt, tossing it towards Jon. I've been told to give that to you. Jon broke the wax and unrolled the message. It read, Jon, I am sorry that I am not there to see you in person. Hopefully Daeron has explained why he and the Company of the Rose have returned to the North. Please believe them, they are friends and allies. I know that my being alive is quite a shock, but it is no trick. I am truly alive and back in the North. The Company of the Rose saved me and Arya from death, and worse in King's Landing. Even managed to take Ice back as well. Jon, words cannot describe how proud I am of you and Robb. The way you have both fought against adversity and have held yourself as true Stark men. Words fail me. I am proud to call you my sons. You are probably wondering what will happen now that I am alive and Robb is king. I am on my way to rally the mountain clans, but we will discuss that and more when we meet. I am sorry for what my actions have caused, but know that you have made me proud beyond belief. Your father, Eddard Stark. Jon, his hands shaking, set down the message. The blood was gone from his face, and he was having trouble breathing. He was gazing down at the letter when another scroll rolled into his gaze. That one might make you a bit happier, Daeron said quietly. Jon quickly broke the seal and read, Jon, I am happy that you're not at the wall. When I heard that you left to be with Robb, I knew you would. I don't know what to write, but Father and I are leaving to get the mountain clans. Hopefully we will see you soon. I still have Needle. Your sister, Arya. Jon cracked a small smile. It had been a long time since he had seen Arya, but he could imagine her breathless, excited voice in his head reading him the letter. It was helping him overcome the shock of the first letter. Jon? Glover asked curiously. What is it? Jon looked up at Howland, sending a silent message to the wiry lord, who simply nodded in return. Jon has just learned that Ned is alive and back in the North, Howland explained, allowing Jon to comprehend what he had just read. The Company of the Rose managed to save him and his daughter Arya from King's Landing. Sansa was unfortunately too well guarded, Daeron added, helpfully. The great Jon leaned forward, glaring at the Cranjadman. What the blazes are you talking about? Ned is dead, beheaded in King's Landing. That was a lie spread by Cersei Lannister and her son, Daeron explained. They killed a man who resembled Ned Stark. I thought the Lannisters had both Stark girls, Maggie Mormont commented. Another lie, Howland answered. Where's Ned now? Stark asked. Gathering the mountain clans, Jon answered, making everyone turn towards him. He and my sister said that they will meet up with us soon. He said that he wanted to bring the entire North down on Rose Bolton, Daeron explained. By the time we relieve Eagle's Roost and retake Deepwood Motte, he should meet us on the way to the Dreadfort. My father said that you were friends and allies, Jon said, gazing at his cousin. Are you ready to prove that? Of course, Daeron answered immediately. Lord Hawker, Jon said, looking at the Lord of Eagle's Roost who had yet to speak. You and I will take the entire cavalry and ride for Eagle's Roost. Daeron and the cavalry of the Company of the Rose shall ride with us. And the rest of us? Karstark grumbled. The army shall continue to march north along the stony shore, Jon answered. We have to march north anyway, to retake Lord Glover's home. That will be all. Jon had dismissed the council, so suddenly that it took a moment for any of them to move. Slowly, starting with Roland Hawker, the other commanders filed out of the room with Daeron Stark taking up the rear. Howland was the only man who hadn't moved. Why didn't you tell me? Jon said angrily, glaring at the small lord. I didn't feel like the time was right, Howland answered honestly. Besides, there was other information that you needed to know as well. I thought it best to give you all the information at the same time. I had a right to know. Jon growled, slamming his hand on the table. My father is fucking alive and has been for months, and you've known this entire time. Actually, I found out when he got to Bravios, Howland corrected calmly. Besides, you had a lot on your plate. Robb and I mourned for him. Jon shouted, standing up. I had a right to know, regardless of all else going on. Would you have reacted any differently? Howland questioned. I knew you would learn eventually, either from myself, a member of the company, or Ned himself. This way, you find out that the Company of the Rose is on our side, that Ned is alive, and how the two are connected. If I were to tell you this back at Moat Cailin or at any point between then and now, how would I have been able to give you proof? You have a letter from your father. Jon began to pace, one hand gripping the pommel of Frost as he glared at the Lord of Greywater Watch. He wasn't sure what he hated more, the fact that Howland hadn't told him or the fact that he was making a compelling argument as to why he was right to not tell Jon. Is there anything else that I or my brother should know? Jon asked finally. Howland shook his head, nothing pressing. I don't care if it's pressing or not, Jon growled. It does actually, Howland retorted in his same quiet and calm tone. With all information, it has to be filtered into two categories. Is it important for someone like yourself to know this, or can it wait? Jon glared at Howland for a moment longer, before sighing and dropping back into his chair. Fine. Howland stood up, straightening his cloak a little, so that it better hid the numerous weapons he had on his person. In every aspect of his life, Howland Reed was a mysterious man who had the potential to be the most dangerous man in Westeros. I am sorry that I did not tell you about your father, he apologized. Now both you and Robb know, Lord Glover will be in charge when Lord Hawker and I ride north to free Eagle's Roost, Jon said, gazing steadily at Howland. Understood, Howland said with a slight bow before leaving. Jon XD. Eagle's Roost was the second largest city in the north, and was closer to a large town rather than an actual city. The walls were made from wood from the wolfwood, and there were watchtowers set at intervals along the battlements, where each could support the other. The gate, which was in complete disarray, was made entirely of ironwood, strengthened by black iron. The town was supported mainly by trade along the western coast, with the cities of Lannisport and Old Town. The Hawkers did not have a large trade fleet, preferring to build ships that sunk iron-borne longships, rather than be captured by them. Jon could physically feel Roland Hawker's anger as the host of cavalry rode towards the town. Towers of smoke rose from the inside the walls, probably from the burnt remains of homes and businesses. Jon had seen a sacked castle before. It wasn't a pretty sight. A sacked town looked even worse. Are there any other entrances into the town? Jon asked as he and his men came to a stop about a mile from the town. He was surrounded by Hawker, Daeron, and other members of Robb's battle guard. There are gates heading north and south. Roland answered. Take 2,000 men and take the southern gate. Eric, take the other 2,000 and take the northern gate. Daeron and his men shall stay with me and attack the main gate, Don said, quickly giving out orders. 3 horn blasts, we attack. How do we know that the castle hasn't been taken? Daeron asked. Roland pointed towards the castle, a building that towered over the rest of the town. Flying from its tallest building was the banner of House Hawker, but it was upside down. Ships in distress will put their flags upside down. Bolton is still holding out. Then we shouldn't keep him waiting, Don said. Lord Hawker, Eric, you have your orders. The longer we stay here, the more chance we have of being spotted, and we lose the element of surprise. The father and son both nodded and rode off. Aegon and Brandon followed their brother while Lord Hawker's captains followed him. It would take them a little time to get into position, which just left Jon and his companions alone with Eddard Stark and his captains. "You're your father's son," Eddard chuckled. Jon glanced at the man, but said nothing. Eddard had other plans, as he kept staring at the man whose shield was emblazoned with a pair of black moose antlers on a field of sand. "So you're my cousin," Eddard said. "Are you really doing a family reunion now?" Roderick Forrester grunted. Eddard shrugged. "What else are we supposed to do? They're here, might as well get it over with now." "I'm the man answered. "You must be Eddard. How come you lot never came back with Robert Baratheon, took the throne?" Eddard Stark asked. A man bearing a blue sunburst on a field of white answered. "Eddard wasn't sure if it was safe for us to return. Our orders were to come back when a Stark wore the crown, not when a Stark did. Robert Baratheon also held Targaryen blood," a beautiful, gray-haired woman added. Her white bear cloak, long sword, and intimidating gaze gave her away, as a Mormont. "As Bryn said, we weren't sure if it was safe to return. Howland stayed in constant contact with you. Why didn't you ask him?" Jon asked, glancing over his shoulder at the discussion. Ned had just lost his father, brother and sister. Eddard answered, "It wouldn't be a good look for the company if we suddenly appeared. The realm was at peace for 20 years. Surely there must have been some point where you thought you could return," Eddard said. "We watched the Stag King closely as he descended into despair and depression." Eddard answered with a small shrug. The trauma from Duskendale furthered Aerys's madness. The death of the Lady Lyanna was Robert's Duskendale. Jon shifted slightly in his saddle. "When King Robert arrived in Winterfell to name my father Hand of the King, Robb and I expected the demon of the Trident, and instead we got a fat, tired, red-faced man who told war stories and warred every night. It was clear that he never moved on from the rebellion. You think marrying the most beautiful woman in Westeros would be enough for any man?" Forrester said quietly. "Cersei Lannister is a bitch," Jon said immediately, turning red slightly. He hated talking badly about women, but Cersei Lannister was someone he instantly disliked. She along with the Kingslayer. Both groups of Northerners laughed at Jon's comment. She does not have a sparkling reputation." Eddard confirmed. "I wonder how she'll react when she learns that Ned is alive." Linebreak. Bolton Hawker. He was down to 100 men, not enough to hold the walls anymore. Most were wounded, including himself, and there was really nothing Maester Mellis could do besides pour boiled wine or water on the wound before wrapping it in whatever cloth he could get his hands on. The defenders were on their last reserves of strength, fighting off of rationed food of leather-like dried meat and moldy bread, but as they have for the past few weeks, whenever the enemy came, the men of Eagle's Roost grabbed their weapons, sent a prayer to the gods, and went to meet them. Bowden was slumped in the Great Hall, with the rest of his men, just waiting for the enemy to send another wave. Retswell's force had been significantly damaged during the siege of Eagle's Roost. He had started with 5,000 men, the combined might of Barrington and the Rills. Bowden doubted if he had more than 700 battle-ready men with him. But that was 600 men that Bowden didn't have. "Captain! Captain!" a guard shouted, stumbling as he burst through the doors. "They're here?" Bowden sighed and grabbed his weapons, his men following suit. It had been 2 days since Ryswa's last attack, and many believed that he meant for the next attack to be the final meeting between the two forces. "No, Captain, it's your brother, Lord Roland," the guard cried, tears of joy cutting through the dirt, blood and grim on the man's face. "I saw them from the Roost." The Roost was the tallest tower in the entire town that commanded a view of not only the town but also the harbor and the land outside the walls. Bowden had started placing men up there day and night ever since he had gotten his brother's message. Energy filled Bowden as the new hit him. Help was finally here, and Ryswell would get what was coming to him. The captain of the Seahawk threw himself to his feet, his weapons in his hands. He was thinner due to starvation and constant stress of an attack, but he now burned with a fiery passion. "Hear that, lads?" Bowden bellowed. "Looks like our friends outside are about to get a little surprise." The 100 defenders cheered. Just like the captain, they too were filled with energy. After seeing friends and family killed, their homes destroyed, their town pillaged, they wanted nothing more than to see the traitors outside town to shreds. How many men are with my brother? Bolton asked, as the men around him prepared for battle. 1,000, Captain, the man answered. They're coming through all 3 gates. Bolton nodded. Good. Get back up the tower and turn the flag the right way around. The guard nodded and ran off. Bolton gave a little sigh of relief. Roland was here, and the siege would finally be over. And he would finally be able to plunge his sword in Roderick Risewell's fucking chest. The line break. Jon. It took an hour, but Jon's scouts had reported that both Eric and his father were in position. There had been no change in the town, so Jon could only assume that he and his men had not been discovered yet. Jon drew Frost. Risewell and his sons are to be captured, he ordered. They are traitors, but they are still highborn and must be treated as such. The warriors behind him muttered their agreement. There was no telling what they might do in the heat of the battle, but Jon hoped that at least a few of them would be able to keep their heads. Jon nodded to his horn blower. Send the signal. The barrel-chested man nodded, wet his lips, and sounded 3 booming notes. After a moment he sounded his horn again with the same 3 notes. Jon raised his sword, then pointed it towards the town. The sellswords behind him cheered and urged their mounts forward, the battle madness slowly overtaking them all. Ghost bounded ahead of the charge, a white blur. It took a few minutes for Jon and his men to cover the distance to the town, but once they were through the gates, they were like an unstoppable flood. Jon, followed by the battle guard and the sellsword captains, took the most direct route that led towards the castle. They encountered very few defenders, most of whom were already mauled by Ghost, but it was only until they were around the castle did they Risewell and his men. For Winterfell, Jon bellowed, cutting down the first man he came across. Jon and his men slammed into the traitorous Northerners, with Hawker and his sons soon joining them as their cavalry emerged from other streets. It was a bloodbath. The men of the Rills and Barrowton were unprepared and tired after weeks of sieging. Against battle-hardened sellswords and men who had fought with Robb in the south, they were sitting ducks. Jon and his companions fought their way towards the castle, where they met Lord Roland and his sons. Without speaking, they all dismounted and ran into the castle, where the Risewell, his sons, and the last of his men were surrounded by the castle defenders. Bolton, Lord Roland shouted, striding across the courtyard. A man who looked like a more wild version of the Lord of Eagle's Roost strode forward as well. The 2 men meeting with a bear hug, Eric, Brandon and Ian all embraced their uncle as well, before all 4 turned back to the enemy. Roderick, Lord Roland growled, surrender and you'll be tried fairly. The man whom Jon assumed was Roderick Risewell, given his tabard and armor, snarled, I'd rather die with a weapon in my hand than my neck on a block. Roland hefted his greatsword. So be it, he said, moving forward, but his brother stopped him. He's mine, Bowden said firmly. The 2 brothers shared a look before Roland nodded and stepped back. Bowden moved forward, stepping in front of the ring of defenders to where he and Risewell were face to face. I told you I would be the one to kill you, Bowden said calmly. Risewell snarled and launched himself at the man, starting the fight. Jon watched the fight with narrowed eyes, making sure that none of Risewell's men interfered, but it looked like they intended to honor their lord's request of single combat that would lead to a semi-honorable death. Even the man's sons stayed back, allowing their father to fight. Bowden and Risewell fought with differing fighting styles. Risewell fought like a man with nothing to lose. His attacks bordered on wild, but there was still technique and experience in the way he fought. He was older than Bowden, but he was still in decent enough shape to give his opponent trouble. Bowden Hawker, on the other hand, looked just as deadly as his brother. Wielding a cutlass and a small axe, he moved effortlessly around Risewell, able to parry and deflect his opponent's blade with his cutlass, while his axe stayed ready to take advantage of any opening. Both fighters managed to hit each other a few times, but there had not yet been a telling blow. Roderick was older, but he hadn't been starved or constantly attacked, like Bowden had. Lord Hawker's brother was just as tall and muscular, but weeks of malnourishment had taken their toll on the man. He was beginning to slow, now noticeably so. He blocked Risewell's strikes instead of parrying them. Whenever he moved, it looked sluggish. Risewell roared and slammed his shield into his opponent, knocking him to the ground. The defenders, men who had fought beside Bowden, moaned with despair. It was not the way they wanted to see their captain go out. I'm gonna die, Risewell growled, preparing for what he thought would be the final blow. But you're gonna go with me. Bowden gritted his teeth, not responding. Riswell's sword flashed towards Bowden's neck, but the captain of the Seahawk was even faster. His axe flew up and intercepted the sword, the haft of the axe holding the blade fast. Riswell's face was a mask of confusion before turning to pain. Plunged into the middle of his chest was Bowden's sword, shoved there with the last of his strength. "I did tell you I would kill you," Bowden growled, kicking Riswell away from him. The Lord of the Rills stumbled away before finally sinking to his knees, his shield falling to his side. His sword was still stuck in the axe. He did not attempt to take the sword out of his chest. Jon doubted he had the strength to do so. All he did was look at it, just barely breathing. "End it, Bowden," Lord Hawker grunted, now that his brother was back on his feet. Bowden nodded and ripped the sword from Riswell's chest, nodding once to him before decapitating the man with one swing. Line break. The survivors of Eagle's Roost celebrated like never before. The food of the besiegers were torn into and distributed as Roland and Bowden celebrated the victory with their people. It was a joyful sight to behold, yet mournful at the same time as many rose to toast to the dead, the honorable and courageous defenders who had given their life to hold out against Riswell and his men. The captains of the Sellsword Company sat with the Hawker brothers, swapping war stories from their time in Essos. Jorah Fisher, from the extinct Northern House, was comparing fleets with Bowden Hawker and the best way to board and take a ship, while Roland Hawker was deep in discussion with Dwan Umber and Alora Mormont about battle strategy and the tactics used in Essos. Jon hid in a balcony above the Great Hall, having found it when he was finding his room earlier that day. He did not have much time to be alone anymore, now that he was the commander of the Northern Army. It was tough sometimes to have men and women older than him look to him to make the hard decisions, but it must be hell for Robb since he wore the crown. "I thought you had gone to bed," Darren Stark said quietly, leaning on the railing beside Jon. "I was," Jon admitted. "But I remember finding this room earlier, and once I was in, I didn't feel like leaving." Darren nodded, the two Starks looking out over the feast. "So have you decided yet if my men and I can be trusted?" Jon smiled slightly. "Considering I don't have a knife in my back yet, I believe you can be trusted." Darren chuckled. "You fought well, but Starks have always been natural fighters. The same for your men." Jon replied. "They're happy to be home," Darren said quietly. "It's been a long time since any of our bloodlines have been here." "None of them traveled back?" Jon asked curiously. Darren shook his head. "My father and his father before him preached that the company was the safest place for us. As much as I hate to admit it, our mission given to us by Torrhen Stark was only half the reason the company stayed together. As long as it did, the other half is fear. If one member decided to go home, then what would stop the others?" Jon nodded. He wanted to keep the pack together. Darren nodded. "For 300 years, we wandered around Essos, fighting in other people's wars and waiting for the day that we got the message to come home. There were times when it was especially tough. The company got hit hard once or twice, but Robert's rebellion was nearly the breaking point of the company. So many wanted to go home, and it took my father everything he had to keep them all together." "What do they plan to do once the war is over?" Jon asked. Darren shrugged. "That is for Ned to decide." Jon hesitated. "How is my father?" Darren glanced at Jon. "He's well. Got a nasty wound to his knee during his time in King's Landing, and when my healer got to him he was afraid he was going to have to take the leg. Thankfully, Thomas was able to root out the infection and save the leg. Before your father and I parted, he was training daily with ice, probably in preparation for when he got his hands on Rose." Jon smiled slightly. He had rarely seen his father spar, but when he had, he was impressed. He was fast and agile, with a keen sense of where his opponent's weakness was and when to exploit it. "There's so much we have to talk about," Jon said quietly. Darren laid a gentle hand on Jon's shoulder. "It's been a long time since you've seen each other. I'm sure you both have things you want to say," he said kindly. "Good night, Jon." Robb that stepped in. "Not what I expected," Sarah Brendan grunted, the first to break the stunned silence that had overtaken Robb and his group. Wanting to get a look at the city, the Northern King, along with Garland, Harold Arryn, Jon Royce, Karen, Brienne and the Blackfish had ridden to a small hill that would overlook the rest of the journey to the city. Expecting to see a city on the brink of ruin, with Joffrey's Baratheon Lannister banner flying over the Red Keep, They instead found a city on the brink of ruin, surrounded by a large host, with the banner of House Targaryen flying over the Red Keep. "Nor I," Robb agreed, "though this explains why the Dornish abandoned Tywin at High Heart. But it doesn't explain why they fought for the man in the first place." Harold Arryn commented. "It was to prolong the war," Robb said grimly, looking over his shoulder at the sandy-haired youth. "They leveled the field when they joined the Lannisters because a longer war means more casualties, and both armies would be greatly weakened when the Targaryens made their return." Robb was slightly surprised that he had figured that out so quickly. Perhaps Marguerite and her grandmother were finally having an effect on him. But the arrival of the Vale forces stopped that, Garland added. A war between the Lannisters and the Starks also meant that all eyes were on the Riverlands and not the city. They would have had to sail to the city. Caron said, joining the discussion. There would have been word if they had marched through the Stormlands or the Reach. Hopefully Saradavos and his men left before they arrived, Robb said. The last report I received from them was that they were cutting off all ships going in and out of the capital. Many were bound for Braavos and other free cities. Joffrey was probably trying to hire sellswords, Sefrinder Brynden said, his eyes narrowing slightly as he gazed at the host around the city. It seems he got more than he wanted. How do you mean? Harold asked. Lord Royce, correct me if I'm wrong, but those are the banners belonging to the Golden Company, the Company of the Cat and the Windblown. Sarah Brynden said, pointing out what he was referring to. Those are 3 of the 4 largest sellsword companies in Essos. That looks like quite a lot more than 3 companies, Caron said, glancing at the old knight. Aye, it is. The Lord of Runstone rumbled. From the number of banners, I'd say that the Targaryens have every company in Essos with them. It seems the Golden Company has stopped caring which Targaryen they fight for. Robb joked grimly. Will we attack? Harold asked curiously. Robb shook his head. No, I'm curious to see what they do, he answered. Lord Caron, Lord Royce, please make sure that the guard around the camp is double and that there are no weak points in our defenses. Your Grace, you said. Arryn went to say, but Robb silenced him with a hand. I know what I said, but I can be curious and cautious at the same time, Robb said. From the looks of it, they're not preparing their own men. They definitely know we're here. They won't attack us yet. What if they do? Garland asked. We'll fall back to Harrenhal, Robb answered with a shrug. Let them fight us on our terms on the land of our choosing. Besides, if they've sailed here, I can't see them having much in terms of supplies to feed their army. The group of nobles watched the city for a few moments longer before Robb turned his mount around. Let's get back to camp. They're bound to send someone soon to treat with us. Line break. Robb, Marguerite, and a few others of his counselors stood in the tent, waiting patiently for the Targaryen emissary. Lord Forrester and Lady Olenna stood on either side of the king and queen, 2 of the most level-headed people that Robb had with him. Garland, Sir Brynden, Lord Royce, and Harold stood off to the side of the room. As always, Brienne prowled nearby, ready for anything. Since High Heart, she had become Robb's principal defender, and was the de facto commander of his guard. The tent flap opened to reveal an old man in white armor, which Robb recognized immediately as Kingsguard armor. He did not wear a helm or carry a shield, but instead had a scroll in one hand, with another resting lightly on his longsword. The man looked close to 70 or 80, but his age seemed to have no effect on him, as he walked with natural grace and looked just as fit and strong as Robb himself. He bowed to Robb and Margaery. My lord, my lady, I am Sir Barristan, Lord Commander of Queen Daenerys Targaryen, the man said, introducing himself. Robb raised an eyebrow. Sir Barristan, the bulb, I do not believe we have ever met before, but my father has spoken well of you. Lord Stark was a great man. His death was unfortunate. Sir Barristan replied with what sounded like genuine sympathy. There were not many men like your father. Sir Barristan, Marguerite said, if I remember correctly, you were Lord Commander to Robert Baratheon. The old knight nodded to the beautiful woman. I was, my lady, but Joffrey blamed Robert's death on me, and dismissed me from his Kingsguard. The Hound, Sandor Clegane, replaced me, and Jaime Lannister was named Lord Commander. He's my prisoner at Riverrun, Robb said bluntly. Why the blazes was he named Lord Commander? Sir Barristan shook his head. I do not know, my lord. The old knight looked around the tent, nodding to those he recognized. Seprenbean and Youn Royce nodded back. the only ones old enough to have had an actual relationship with the man. You said that you are here for the Targaryens, Robb said, bringing the conversation back to its original point. I must admit that myself and my counselors were surprised to find them here. Queen Daenerys and King Aegon have returned to reclaim the Iron Throne. Ser Barristan said easily. Joffrey, Cersei, and all their supporters have been imprisoned. Joffrey and Cersei have also been stripped of their crowns. Come to reclaim Westeros. You mean? Lady Olenna said, a serious look on her wizened face. Please do not give me vinegar and call it honey, Sarah. Their graces would prefer to unite Westeros peacefully, Ser Barristan responded. They have no wish for war. Forgive me if I am skeptical that a house whose words are fire and blood want to be peaceful, Robb said, crossing his arms. Ser Barristan, you mentioned Aegon Targaryen. Margaery said, a thoughtful look on her face. He was said to have died in the rebellion. So Barristan nodded. I am sure you have many questions, my lady, and that is why I am here. The old knight stepped forward, offering Robb the scroll in his hands. It's an invitation from the Queen to meet tomorrow afternoon, to discuss the situation, and to hopefully find a peaceful resolution. Where will this take place? Robb asked, taking the scroll. Starks don't do well in King's Landing. There will be a tent set up on land between the two camps. Ser Barristan explained simply, the Queen requests that you bring no more than 5 advisors and a dozen guards. Robb glanced at Margaery, who looked back at him and nodded. Very well. Tomorrow at noon, we will be there. Robb answered, Thank you, Ser Barristan. The knight bowed and went to leave, then stopped himself. My lord, there were some who wanted to attack you as soon as you entered the region. Were it any other man wearing that crown, I would have accepted the decision. But I had the honor of knowing your father, and I know what kind of son he raised. I look around and see the men you and women you surround yourself with. They are honorable and good. I hope that we can find a way for both sides to come together without bloodshed. Robb wasn't sure how to respond to the knight's honest declaration, but thankfully Margaery did. That is very kind of you, Ser Barristan, she said easily. It has been a long year for all of us, and we all wish to go home. Reaching an agreement without bloodshed would be a fine way to end such a bloody conflict. I just hope that your king and queen understand that compromises must be made in the name of peace. Ser Barristan nodded and left the tent. They were smart to send a man, Lady Olenna mused, the most respected knight in the realm, meeting with a member of House Stark. You think the Targaryens will hold to their promise, Your Grace? Harold asked. Robb broke the seal on the scroll and unrolled it. The message inside read, Robb Stark, King in the North. I am Daenerys of House Targaryen, the last child of King Aerys II Targaryen. For almost 20 years, my family has been absent from its rightful place in Westeros, and now my nephew and I have returned to reclaim what is ours. I will not lie, we did not expect to find you in the position that you now find yourself. While a few on my council believe that war is inevitable, Ser Barristan and others believe that, since it is you who wear the crown, that peace can be achieved. Perhaps they are right, but it is up to you to prove them so. As Ser Barristan has been instructed to say, a tent shall be placed in the middle of our two camps, a neutral zone, if you will. My Lord Commander will have also instructed you how many advisors and guards to bring. I will do the same. 5 advisors and a dozen guards. I give you my word that, should peace not be found between us, that you and your companions will be allowed back to your camp. Signed, Queen Daenerys Targaryen. Robb passed the message to his wife, who looked over it with her grandmother, while the king began to pace. Barristan is right. House Targaryen is really back, Robb said, speaking to his counselors without looking at them. What do they want? Lord Forrester asked. Westeros, it seems. Lady Olenna sighed. Then again, after 300 years, I expected nothing less. They promised us safe passage back to our camp if we cannot reach an agreement. Margaery said, It gives us leverage if things go wrong. Their word means little to me, Robb said, shaking his head. The Mad King proved that when he burned my grandfather and had my uncle strangled. This Daenerys doesn't seem like her grandfather. At least she's willing to find a peaceful solution. Margaery offered, But there are those around her who want us dead, my dear. Olenna countered. A knife in the back would solve many of their problems. Your Grace, Ser Barristan, nor the letter seemed to mention the Mad King. Harold said. Do you think perhaps this woman doesn't know of her ancestry? Robb looked at the Lord of the Eyrie. Good catch, he said. That's more leverage, especially if she brings Barristan to the meeting. Sarah Bryden, Lord Royce, you both shall accompany me as well. That's two. Olenna said. Who else will go with you? Margaery said immediately. Robb's head snapped up and looked at his wife, who met his gaze, the two having a silent debate of their own. Margaery wanted to be at Robb's side when he met with Daenerys, but Robb clearly feared for her safety and that of their unborn child. Finally, Margaery's side won over, and Robb nodded reluctantly. Very well, Robb said. Lord Forrester and Lord Cairn shall round out the group. Brienne, you are in charge of putting together 11 men for a guard. You shall be the 12th. The large warrior woman bowed slightly. Of course, sire. That will be all for today, my lords. I will see you all tomorrow, Robb said, dismissing his counselors. The men all bowed and left, leaving Margaery, Robb, and Olenna alone. Brienne was the last to leave, taking her place just outside the tent, as the first line of defense. Do you trust them? Robb asked his wife.
Do we have a choice?
Margaery asked, sinking into a chair with a slight sigh. Even though the pregnancy had done nothing to diminish her beauty in Robb's eyes, he could see that it still affected her. She tired more quickly, seemed to eat a lot, and yet sometimes had no appetite. Nevertheless, she continued to run Robb's kingdom, while the young wolf focused on the war. We could move back into the Riverlands, but that would be counterproductive as Lord Smallwood is currently trying to put out all the fires and deal with the Bloody Mummers and the Brotherhood. Without banners, Robb answered, handing his wife a glass of fruit juice. Before Robb had moved south from Harrenhal, he had placed Theosamar Smallwood and a small host of 1,000 light cavalry under his command to do his best to clear the land of raiders and help the people of the Riverlands. The last thing Robb wanted to do was bring war back into the region that had been so heavily hit already. So no, we don't have much of a choice, Margaery said with a sad smile. Your Grace, the Targaryens are reaching out for peace. We may not get another chance like this, Lady Olenna said, placing both her hands on her cane. This may also be a ploy to get me and Margaery away from our men so that they can kill us. Robb grumbled. I remember you being more optimistic. Margaery chuckled. Where was this caution against Tywin or Stannis? I wasn't married, nor was my wife with me when I faced a potential enemy, Robb answered seriously. Your Grace, killing you at peace talks would work against the Targaryens. Lady Olenna said, the lords here will spread word to the others, and soon the whole realm would know of their transgressions. And then Jon and your father would come south and avenge us. Margaery finished. If my father was here, they'd kill us on sight. Robb grumbled. They still think he's a traitor. That's where we can use men like Ser Barristan against the Targaryens, Lady Olenna said easily. If asked directly, I highly doubt Ser Barristan, Selmy will lie about the atrocities House Targaryen committed against the Starks. Robb rubbed his jaw. Perhaps. The Queen of Thorns patted the Northern King on his shoulder as she walked out. Believe me, the Targaryens have quite a few skeletons in their past, and if given the choice, I believe the common folk would rather choose the Honorable Wolf King against the newly returned Dragon Queen. Just before the old woman left, she called over her shoulder. Besides, the Mad King left many scars, and those won't go away for quite some time. Daenerys II. I still don't like this idea, Aegon grumbled, crossing his arms. Sarah Barristan had just returned from the Stark camp with news that Robb Stark had agreed to sit down with Dany and her advisors. The Mother of Dragons had been hesitant to hand out the olive branch, but Varys and Barristan's words had gotten to her. She did not want the commoners to see her as an invader, and attacking Robb Stark would unfortunately make her look like it. Sire, were it any other man, Ser Barristan began to say, before being cut off. We know, Ser Olly Duckfield, the Lord Commander of Aegon's Kingsguard growled. They're the bloody Starks of Winterfell. They can do no wrong. Duckfield was a brawny man, with a bushy beard and a shock of orange hair. He looked more like a blacksmith than a knight to Dante, which is fitting because he started out in the Golden Company as a blacksmith before becoming a squire. He and Aegon were like brothers and shared the same view on the Starks. Did Robb Stark give his word? Aegon asked. When Ser Barristan shook his head, Aegon laughed victoriously. There we go! How do we know he won't arrive in that tent with 100 men and take us hostage? My lord, Robb Stark is said to be just like his father, Eddard Stark said from his place at the wall. He had been invited by Dany to attend the meeting, particularly since it pertained to the Northern King. Whether he gave his word or not, he will honor the Queen's request. 5 advisors and a dozen guards. I thought you hated the Starks, Connington grunted. I had my issues with Ned Stark, Jorah answered, but I will not lie. He was the most honorable man in Westeros all the way to his death. He rose up against his rightful king. Aegon barked. All at once, Barristan, Jorah, and Varys all shifted slightly in their seats. Dany noticed it, but didn't say anything. She had a feeling that there was something about the usurpers' rebellion that she wasn't told, but she decided that it was something to worry about after Robb Stark was dealt with. My lady, I believe we can trust the Starks, Sir Barristan said, looking at Dany. They have multiple armies in the field as we speak, and yet they still choose to pursue a peaceful resolution. Or perhaps they are waiting till they have their full strength before tearing apart your precious peace and attacking us. Connington said fiercely, the Starks rebelled against the Targaryens 20 years ago. I doubt they're willing to meekly make peace now. Eddard and Stark nodded in agreement. Dany now saw the table for what it was. Sir Barristan and Sir Jorah felt that the Starks could be trusted, though only just, while Connington, Eddard, and Duckfield didn't feel like it was worth the effort. The only men who hadn't spoken were Varys, Gorys, Prince Doran, and Lord Ardrian. Gorys and Celtigar looked bored and would go with whatever was decided. Doran and Varys were worth hearing from. Prince Doran, I would hear your thoughts, Dany said. The partially crippled ruler of Dorne folded his hands on his lap. My family has no love for the Baratheons, Starks or Lannisters, but Ned Stark had a reputation for being good, honorable, and honest. I do believe the meeting is worth it if only to see and speak with the man we might see on the field of battle. Dany nodded. It was sound advice from the Dornish prince. Now it was time to hear from the spider.
Varys, you've been quiet. Let us hear what you have to say. Daenerys called down the table.
The eunuch gave the queen a small, amused smile. I agree with Sir Barristan and with Prince Doran at the same time. Explain, Aegon grumbled. Varys seemed unaffected by the king's sour mood. Sir Barristan and Sir Jorah are correct. Robb Stark is very much like his father. He will honor whatever he commits himself to. Prince Doran makes a very reasonable point as well. Even if peace cannot be reached by the two parties, at least we have a chance to see what kind of man we will face in battle.
Sir Barristan, were there others with Stark when you met with him? Connington asked.
Barristan nodded. There were, your grace. I recognized a few men, notably Lord Royce and Sir Brynden. Tully. Jorah grunted and crossed his arms. Something on your mind, sir? Aegon asked. Forgive me, but both men were principal commanders during the rebellion. Jorah answered. I'm sure Prince Doran, Sir Barristan, and even Lord Connington can agree that Robb Stark is more dangerous because they are at his side. Not to mention that he almost beat Tywin Lannister without them, Varys added unhelpfully. But no Randyll Tarly, Connington said. Sir Barristan shook his head. No, but if Varys' agents are correct, then he has an army of his own in the Westerlands. There is also Stark's bastard brother in the north. Jorah commented, even if we do manage to kill Robb Stark, there is always the chance that his brother will pick up his crown. Dany resisted the urge to sigh. When Connington had turned the conversation to warfare, Robb Stark still had the advantage. She knew that no man was unbeatable. The death of her son and stars had proven that. But Robb Stark seemed annoyingly unbeatable. Perhaps that's why Septa Barristan was pushing so much for peace. Did he think that Dany and Eragon would be unable to beat the young wolf? I was the one who invited Robb Stark to sit down, Dany said finally. I intend to honor my request just as he has. If some here do not wish to attend the meeting, then so be it. But I will go. Aegon shook his head. We must look united. Now more than ever. If you feel like this will work, then I will accept your decision and be there at the meeting. Her nephew's words slightly surprised Dany. There were times during their short time together that he managed to catch Dany off guard, when he managed to sound very mature and kingly. There were times when he sounded immature, or simply naive. But Aegon did seem to have his moments. Connington nodded his approval. I will join you, my lady, as well. Ser Barristan? Ser Jorah? Dany asked, glancing at the knights who both nodded their agreement. If I may include myself, Varys asked. I would very much like to attend as well. Dany nodded. Prince Doran, would you like to round out our group? The Dornishman shook his head. I'm afraid that my current condition isn't the best for muddy fields. If you wish, my brother Oberyn can take my place. Of course, Aegon answered. I will have Grey Worm put together a dozen Unsullied as an escort, Dany said. Perhaps we should take the dragons, Aegon said slowly, a slight smirk on his face. Dany glanced at Ser Barristan, who did not look keen on the idea, and shook her head. Perhaps the best way to achieve peace is to leave behind the dragons. Dany would have loved to bring her dragons, but she knew what message it would send. Besides, she did not want to show them off just yet. They were her secret, and extremely deadly, weapons that no one else in Westeros had. Adeptum shrugged. Very well, I believe that is all for today, my lords. Line break?
Your Grace?
Connington said, looking a little shocked that Daenerys was in his office. She and the Hand of the King did not have much of a relationship, and so it was odd that Daenerys was in his office. Lord Connington, Dany replied, taking a seat across from the man. I was hoping that we could speak before the meeting tomorrow. Connington nodded, filing away any papers that were in front of him. Of course. What would you like to talk about? Do you believe that we can achieve peace with the Starks? Dany asked, coming right out with the question. Connington looked a little taken back, but finally shrugged, leaning forward on his desk. I believe that it's possible. There are advantages and disadvantages to such a thing. You said that it would give Robb Stark time to gather his full strength, Dany said, remembering what the man had said during the small council meeting. Connington nodded. There's that. But it also gives them time to solidify their rule, tie up any loose ends that they might have, and rest their men. The same could be said for us. There is also the fact that Robb Stark has control of the Reach, the Riverlands, and the Westerlands. The first two are the main producers of food for the realm. The third is a literal gold mine. If we were to have peace, we would have to rely on someone else to feed us, Dany said. Connington nodded. There is also the fact that we are cut off from our main ally, the Dornish. What about the Crownlanders? Dany asked. Connington shook his head. After 2 battles with Robb Stark, they have barely 3,000 men. Given time, they could return to their full strength, which is about 15,000. But so could the Reach, the North, and the rest of Stark's land, Dany said. Connington nodded. During the Usurpers' Rebellion, the royal army comprised of the Crown Lands, the Dornish, and a few houses from the Riverlands and Stormlands. We also had the army of the Reach, which was remarkably vast, but Mates Tyrell foolishly elected to siege Storm's End. And the usurper had the North, Stormlands, Riverlands, and the Vale, Dany said, knowing her history all too well. It seems history has repeated itself. Connington nodded. I'll be frank, my lady. We are not in the best situation. War, as much as I hate to say it, would be our best and worst option.
Dany raised an eyebrow. How so?
If there was a war, then we would be able to pay the sellsword companies with loot from battles, and we would have to pay them less because of casualties. Your dragons give us a significant advantage in all confrontations, and war is generally good because it makes men active, Condon explained. Unfortunately, we do not have the resources the Starks possess. We would also have to face a good commander in Robb Stark and a great commander in Randil Tarly, both of which are backed by able captains and large armies. My dragons would be able to level the field, would they not? Dany asked. She knew her children's capabilities and had seen them firsthand. She was sure that men would run at the sight of them. Connington grimaced. When your ancestor Aegon the Conqueror took Westeros, Ballion and the others were hundreds of years old, if my history serves me right. A miraculous shot from a scorpion or another dragon was the only thing that could take down such a beast. Given the size of your children, I would reckon the Starks could do it with enough arrows. Dany frowned. Surely the damage they can inflict would be devastating. Connington shrugged. True, but how far away do the dragons have to be to attack the enemy? Ballion could do it from the clouds, where no archer could reach him. The Hand sighed and leaned back in his chair. Forgive me, Your Grace. I do not wish to speak ill of your dragons. I just wish to be realistic. Dany nodded. Peace would allow them to grow. A small smile spread across Connington's face. Aye, that's true. It would take years, but we could use the time to dismiss the sellswords, use Illyrio's money to rebuild the city, allow the Crownlanders to rebuild their armies. We could prepare to take on the Starks, Dany said, finishing the sentence. Just as my ancestor did on Dragonstone during the conquest.
Connington nodded.
In a way, yes. Dany stood. Thank you, my lord. This discussion was very helpful. Connington nodded. Of course. Dany walked towards the door, but Connington called after her before she opened it. My lady, I wish to apologize for the king's behavior over the past few days. He is still young, and the burden of ruling is something he is still learning. Dany looked over her shoulder. Hopefully he will have years to get better, she responded before leaving. Robb writes. The tent was a giant display of black and red, with banners bearing the three-headed dragon of House Targaryen. It was a not-so-subtle reminder of who Robb and the others were meeting with. The Northern King briefly wondered where they had found a tent in such a short notice. Robert Baratheon would have surely put anything like it to the torch years ago. On either side of the entrance into the tent were Northern soldiers bearing swords, shields, and spears. Brienne was right beside them, armed and armored. They all looked ready to receive any threat. Garland and Robb helped Margaery out of the carriage, helping her smooth out her dress before she and Robb made their way to the entrance, the others forming up right behind them. Neither of them wore their crowns, unsure of the reaction they would provoke. Margaery squeezed Robb's hand, showing her silent support. It filled the young man with quite a lot of confidence to face whatever was inside. Robb nodded to Brienne. The warrior woman pulled back the tent flap, allowing Robb and others to enter. The inside of the tent was illuminated by dozens of candles. In the center was a long table, decorated with a black and red tablecloth and laden with food and wine. The Targaryens and their counselors were already waiting and standing behind their chairs. Robb and Margaery stood behind two chairs at the center of the table as the others spread out along the rest of the table. Lord Stark, the woman across from Robb said, starting the meeting. I am Daenerys Targaryen. Thank you for agreeing to this meeting. May I introduce my nephew and betrothed Aegon Targaryen. Robb took a moment to assess the woman in front of him. She was a girl, really, but still strikingly beautiful with silver gold hair, violet eyes, and pale skin. She looked like a Targaryen in every way, and held herself as such with the confidence that seemed to scream royalty. She wore a silky black dress that looked slightly out of place in Westeros. Coiled around her neck was a silver dragon choker. The young man next to her looked like a failed attempt of a Targaryen. The edge of his hair was tinged blue, and he had a sort of rugged handsomeness to him. Daenerys looked otherworldly. Aegon just looked different. It was as if he was trying to pass for something that he wasn't. He wore a black tunic emblazoned with a red three-headed dragon. Pleasure, Robb said simply, nodding to them both. May I introduce my lady wife Margaery of House Tyrell. Margaery bowed slightly. Robb watched as Daenerys glanced down at the pregnant belly before a kinder, sweeter smile appeared. You are very welcome, my lady, she said. Per your request, my other counselors are Sir Brendan Tully of the Riverlands, Lord Ewan Royce of the Vale, Lord Forrester of the North, and Lord Bryce Caron of the Stormlands, Robb said, with each man nodding briefly as their name was said. I am accompanied by my own council, Daenerys responded. The Hand of the King, Lord John Connington, Seer Jorah Mormont, the Commander of the Gold Cloaks, Varys, my Master of Whispers, and as you have already met, Seer Barristan Selmy, Lord Commander of my Queensguard. Prince Oberyn is here in place of his brother, my Master of Laws, Prince Doran Martell. Please, let us be seated. There was a brief clatter of wood as the two groups took their seats. Robb took the time to pull out Margaery's chair and put it back in for her. An action that the Northern King saw was not mirrored by the Targaryens. Robb was the last to take his seat.
Forgive me, but you cannot be Aegon, son of Prince Rhaegar, and Princess Aelia? Margaery asked, curiously.
Aegon gave her a fierce look. I am, he answered firmly. I was saved by loyalists after my father was murdered. I was raised in secret by Lord Connington, in Essos. I am sorry for what happened to your family, my lord, Robb said kindly, nodding to both Aegon and Prince Oberyn. My father wanted justice for their murders. He and Robert Baratheon fought over it. I'm sure that made him sleep better at night, Egan grumbled. The tension in the air doubled with the comment. A few on the other side of the table glanced at their king, while the young man kept his gaze firmly on Robb. I must commend you on your victories over the Lannisters, my lord. The red-haired man next to Aegon said, trying to break the tension. Robb remembered that Daenerys had referred to him as Lord Connington. They are quickly becoming legend. I cannot take all the glory, my lord, Robb said easily. I am lucky to be surrounded by men such as Sir Brendan and Lord Royce, as well as having good men fight in my name. I must admit, fighting the Dornish was not something I anticipated. Prince Oberyn looked up from his drink when his people were mentioned. I am sorry about Harrenhal. I'm sure you understand my motives now. Robb nodded slightly. I do. Harrenhal taught me a very important lesson. Always expect the unexpected. Oberyn smiled slightly and went back to his drink. My lady, Robb said, looking at the Targaryen queen. You called this meeting. You have the floor. Daenerys nodded. I understand that you fought against the Lannisters. They wreaked havoc on Westeros, but they are no longer power. The young woman took a breath. Would you be willing to set aside your crown and swear loyalty to me and my betrothed? Robb shook his head. I am sorry, but I must refuse. Aegon's eyes burned like bonfires. What do you mean you refuse? Robb turned his gaze on the young man, his expression still one of slight regret. I will not kneel to you, nor will I set aside my crown. You are before your lawful sovereigns, Aegon growled. Robb shook his head. Aegon the Conqueror took Westeros because he had the power to do so. Robert Baratheon defeated your family because he had the power to do so. I do not see you as my lawful anything. Aegon looked ready to leap across the table at Robb, but the Northern King kept his calm composure. He was sure that, if not for the tense environment, Margaery would be grinning at how Robb was handling all of this. Your family are traitors, Aegon managed finally. Robb shook his head, again. My father's part in Robert Baratheon's rebellion is justified. You would know if you knew your history. He rose against his rightful king to support his friend's ambition and greed. Aegon snapped. He rose up against the man who murdered his father and brother. Robb barked, his calm but regretful expression finally falling away. Your father raped my aunt. You best look to the crimes of the Mad King before slandering my family with the title of traitors. When the king murders men in cold blood and his son is a rapist, that family loses all right to wear any crown. The air in the tent became thick with tension. Aegon's face was contorted with fury, and Lord Connington looked just as outraged. Curiously enough, Daenerys was simply gazing at Robb with poorly hidden shock. The other Targaryen counselors simply looked uncomfortable. You dare insult my father and grandfather, Aegon said, rising slowly from his seat, his voice deadly quiet. Robb leaned forward, glaring at the man. These men around me were there, even some of your own, as well. Sarah Barristan, Sarah Jorah, Varys. Ask any one of them, and they will tell you the same. Rickon Stark, my grandfather, was hung from the rafters and burned in his armor after demanding trial by combat. Your grandfather, the Mad King, declared fire his champion. Brandon Stark, my uncle, strangled himself to death, trying to save his father. Furthermore, your father raped Lyanna Stark, my aunt, and left her in Dorne when he finally realized what his foolish mistake had done. Ivan looked around at the men around him. None met his gaze. He reminded Robb of Loras, when he and the Knight of Flowers had faced off at Bitterbridge after Renly's death. Just like Loras then, Aegon did not know the facts and did not have support from those around him. Sarah Barristan, none here can doubt your honor, Robb said. You are a man respected by both parties. Would you say that my father was justified in the actions he took? All eyes turned to the old knight, who now looked older than ever. It wasn't only his armor that was weighing on him, but the weight of time as well. I was there, Barristan said sadly, unable to look at Robb Stark. I know well the crimes that were committed against your family. Robb leaned back in his chair, feeling that his point was made very clear. Now you see why I will not bend the knee to you. There are regions under your rule who might feel differently, Connington said finally, having finally choked down his anger. The Reach is loyal to its king. My husband, Margaery responded immediately, taking Robb's hand in hers. The Vale stands with House Stark and His Grace Robb Stark. Lord Royce said firmly. The Stormlands will serve no other, Lord Caron added. The Riverlands were in disarray when His Grace arrived. Sarah Brendan grunted. He saved us. There is no other we'd rather serve. The North already has a king. Lord Forrester said simply. Robb Stark, the king in the North. The Westerlands are not yours. Connington pointed out. Westeros didn't belong to the Targaryens before the Conqueror took them. Robb replied. My armies fought and bled to take them. That makes them mine. Robb thought he would feel different when he said that, but he didn't. When he had first started south, it was to save his father and return to the north. Now, after marrying Margaery, facing Tywin, and being declared king, he realized in that moment that going back home to Winterfell was an option he gave up when he took on the crown. He had to be a king, and he could not afford to look weak in front of the Targaryens. Screw you, Stark, Adon snapped. If you want war, then you'll get it. The young king stormed out of the tent, followed by Connington, Prince Oberyn, and Ser Jorah. Robb sighed and shook his head. I did not come here to start a war, he said, looking at Daenerys. No, I supposed you didn't, Daenerys replied quietly. Your Grace, my lord, perhaps I can be of some assistance. Varys said, speaking for the first time. House Stark and House Targaryen are some of the greatest and noblest houses in Westeros. There is no need for war when peace can be achieved. Do you believe that it can? Margaery asked. King Aegon has made his feelings very clear. He was unaware of the crimes of his grandfather. My father, Daenerys answered. I will speak with him. Margaery regarded the Targaryen queen, waiting for Robb to speak. Lord Varys, what did you have in mind? Robb said finally. You and your wife will soon be blessed with a child, Varys explained. Hopefully, the king and queen will have children of their own. I propose that your first son marries the daughter of Queen Daenerys and King Aegon. That would take years, my lord, Margaery answered. There's no telling when we'll have a son, or when Queen Daenerys will have a daughter. It is my hope that both couples have many children, and after all the realm has been through, I'd say that any chance at peace is something worth pursuing, Varys said. Robb knew that the last comment was aimed at him. He did want this war to end. He wanted to finally stop fighting and find a place where he and Margaery could raise their child. He wanted to see his family again. There will be things I need before I agree to this, Robb said finally. First and foremost is my sister and any other prisoner of war taken by the Lannisters. Of course, Daenerys said. Your sister will be sent over tomorrow at noon. I will escort her myself. The others can be negotiated at the same time. Robb nodded. What will be done with Joffrey and his mother? They, along with a few others, will be executed, Daenerys answered. My council and I are still deciding on who will join them. Is Petyr Baelish among them? Lord Royce asked. Varys nodded. He is. I understand he caused quite a stir in the Vale. So long as he pays for his crimes, he convinced Lysa Arryn to kill Jon Arryn. Royce grunted. As long as Joffrey and his mother, along with Baelish, pays for their crimes, then I am content. I'm sure we'll deal with more prisoners tomorrow, Robb said. Daenerys nodded. That we shall. Robb looked at the others around the table before getting up. The others, including Daenerys, copied the action. We will have to work out a permanent peace over the coming weeks, Robb said. I must admit, I am happy to be working on it, with you, my lady. You have acted very nobly tonight. Daenerys smiled slightly. You did well yourself, my lord. I bid you and your wife a good night. Line break? That didn't go as bad as I thought it would, Robb said, throwing his cloak over the back of a chair and pouring himself a drink as Margaery and Mira disappeared behind a screen, so that Margaery could change into something more comfortable. You certainly caught them off guard when talking about the Mad King, Margaery responded, grunting slightly as she changed. Neither Aegon nor Daenerys seemed to know about him, or the truth about him. You did well to have Sarah Barristan back up your claim. I'd say your grandmother would be very proud of how I conducted myself. Robb laughed as Margaery emerged from behind the screen. She kissed Robb gently before easing herself into a comfortable chair. She wasn't the only one. Margaery commented, Now we will meet with the woman tomorrow to discuss prisoners. Robb nodded. It will be good to have Sansa back. I can't imagine what Joffrey has put her through. I'm a little surprised Dagon isn't trying to put every prisoner in the city to the sword, simply for supporting the Lannisters, or you, Margaery said. He seems unsure, aggressive, like he's trying to compensate. Robb sighed. I much prefer Daenerys. She at least has some control over her emotions. Do you think that we can have peace with the Targaryens? Margaery asked quietly. They weren't exactly shy about their claim to Westeros. Robb rubbed his jaw. I believe that, with Daenerys we can. I don't trust her exactly, but she at least seems willing to try. Aegon, he worries me. He already has an army under his command. I worry what he'll do with it, the second we turn our back. Peace usually comes with its risks, Margaery said. For both parties, well, we've already decided what route we're taking, Robb said. Now we just have to see if it leads to actual, lasting peace or more bloodshed. Eddard IV. The mountain clans of the north did not live in castles like the other lords of the north. There were no stone walls or keeps. Instead, the clans lived in ring forts, just like the first men used to. A wall of spiked logs encircling a great hall and other smaller buildings. 2 men stood guard at the gate to the fort, each armed with stout iron-tipped spears and hide-covered shields. Their armor consisted of thick furs and leathers. Because of their size and the amount of hair that covered them, both animals and their own, they looked rather beastly. What is this place? Arya whispered to her father. Buckerton, Ned replied easily, with a slight smile on his face. The sigil of the walls are 3 buckets on a blue field. Their ancestors were quite literal. How many mountain clans are there? Arya asked. Ned thought for a moment before answering. About 40 of them, all spread out through the mountains and along the Bay of Ice. Do you think they'll help us? Arya asked as soon as Ned finished his answer. Ned gazed at his daughter. Do you think we'd be here if I didn't? Arya didn't answer, just shaking her head. She didn't ask any more questions. One of the fur-clad men stepped forward, lowering his spear. He looked like the typical clansman with a bushy beard, wild hair pulled into a greasy braid, and a stomach that showed his fondness for ale. What's your business? He growled. I've come to see the wall, Ned said firmly. In typical first-man fashion, Ned simply referred to Hugo Wall by his last name. The mountain clans called Ned the Ned, not Lord Stark. Why? The man barked. I am the Ned the Stark of Winterfell. Ned answered with a more authoritative tone. I have come to call upon the Wall and the men of his clan. The guardsman looked a little taken back, before gesturing for his companion to go get their chieftain. Ned remained where he was, completely at ease. He knew without looking that Arya was trying to look the same. There was some commotion from behind the main gate before the guard reappeared, a large-bellied man right behind him. Hugo Wall was exactly as Ned remembered him. Tall, with thickly muscled arms and shoulders, his massive gut bulging under his broad belt. He wore chainmail armor and had a fur cloak draped across his shoulders. He held a double-bladed battle axe in one hand. He had an annoyed look on his face that vanished as soon as he caught sight of Ned. The Ned, he boomed, tossing his axe to one of the guards and clasping arms with the Lord of Winterfell. You're supposed to be dead, you bugger. Ned chuckled, sliding down from the saddle. When he had 2 feet on the ground, the clansman swept him off his feet with a bear hug, driving the wind from his lungs before he was eventually let down. It's been a long time, Hugo, Ned said quietly, trying to catch his breath. The big man nodded. Too long. How are you not dead? We heard you were dead. It was a lie by the Lannisters, Ned explained, before gesturing to Arya. This is my daughter, Arya. Hugo nodded respectfully to her. Welcome, Arya of Winterfell. Arya could only nod back, her eyes slightly wide. Hugo turned his gaze on Syrio Forel, who was watching the encounter with an amused look. Who the blazes are you? Ned smiled. The mountain clans had a very blunt manner, which always amused Ned and horrified Cat whenever they attended festivals and feasts at Winterfell. Syrio bowed gracefully. I am Syrio Forel, former First Sword of Bravos. Hugo looked extremely confused, but before he could ask another question, Ned interrupted. Hugo, do you know what's happening in the north? He asked. The clansman nodded seriously. Boltons are oath-breakers, he growled. The Leech Lord sent us a rider a few moons ago. I sent him the head back without the tongue. We do not take orders from traitors. Ned nodded. My son Jon leads the rest of the Northern Lords west to free the Hawkers. The company of the Rose, Northmen who went into hiding when the last Stark king knelt, is with him. Hugo nodded. That is good. I mean to rally the clansmen and march with my son on the Dreadfort, Ned finished. Will you join me? Hugo smiled fiercely, clasping arms once again with the Lord of Winterfell. We will answer the call, Ned of Winterfell. That night, Hugo Wool held a modest feast to celebrate Ned not being dead, and returning the company of the Rose home to the north. No northern lord in his right mind would ever hold a feast like they do in the south, with winter just a few months away, but Ned still appreciated the sentiment behind it. It was made even more special by the fact that the mountain clans were some of the poorest lords under Ned's governance. They were using precious supplies in his honor. Before the feast, Hugo sent riders to the nearest clans with orders for them to assemble their warriors and rally to Bo-Katan. The northern clans had a good system in place, where if riders were sent to the nearest clans to prepare for war, then that message would be spread to other clans by more riders. It was a giant web-like network that allowed the more barbaric clansmen to assemble with relative quickness. Now Ned sat at Wool's right hand in the place of honor, Arya and Syrio to his right. They feasted on roasted goat with wild vegetables and fresh bread. And now, of course. Hugo, why didn't you go with Robb south? Ned asked quietly as they ate. The large man shook his head. We were told we were not needed, he answered with a shrug. Ryder said that there would be no war. He was wrong. Ned raised an eyebrow. He would have imagined that Robb would have called upon every warrior in the north. Then again, he probably thought that there wasn't time to get the clansmen together. Which isn't true. It'll take a few days before most of the clansmen assemble at Bo-Katan. They know secret paths through the mountains and are very rough and ready soldiers who are able to move with deceptive speed. Did any clansmen go south? Ned asked. Hugo nodded. Olwen Nori rode with Robb of Winterfell. No others. Ned nodded. I'm sure my son appreciated it. What happened to you? Hugo asked, practically barking the question as he ripped into the leg of a goat. You were dead? I was saved by the men of the Company of the Rose, Ned answered. The group was formed by second and third sons, or cousins, by Torrhen Stark, in case the north was attacked by the Targaryens. They've remained across the narrow sea all these years and have returned because Robb has been named king. Are there any wolves? Hugo asked. Ned nodded. I think so. Who leads them? Wool asked. The Lost Northmen? A cousin of mine, Ned answered. Darren Stark. Hugo nodded. When the Boltons are killed, what will happen to the new Northmen? Ned shrugged. There are a few long-lost families among them. Ryders, Grey Starks, Rid Starks, Greenwoods, and others. I'll find them castles close to their original holdings. Umbers, Manderleys, and Mormonts, and the rest will return to their homes. Hugo grunted. Smart. Ned made sure he ate enough food. He didn't want to insult the people of Buck-in by not eating enough food. They would take it as an insult if he barely ate. The last thing Ned wanted was a bunch of drunk half-giants chasing him down with various roasted meats or battle axes. The girl, Hugo said suddenly. She looks like your sister. Ned nodded, his mind flooded with memories of his late sister, as they always were when she was brought up. The bloody sheets. The smell of death and flowers. The faint cry of a baby. She does, Ned answered quietly. Syrio Forel is training her to fight. With what? A bow? Knife? Hugo asked. Sword. Arya answered bluntly. Hugo chuckled. This one has the wolf blood. What? Arya asked, looking at her father. It's a term in our family, Ned explained, ruffling Arya's hair. You have the wildness of a wolf inside you. My sister and older brother had it. Oh, Arya said quietly. Who else has it? Just you, little one. Ned laughed. The gods blessed me with just one wild child. My father got the short end of the stick and got two. Where is your son now? Hugo asked, changing the subject. Robb or Jon? Ned asked. The king in the north? Hugo clarified. Ned shook his head. I'm unsure. Hopefully he's marching on King's Landing to finish off the Lannisters once and for all. Will he stay in the south? Ned went to answer, then stopped. I am unsure. Something to decide later. Hugo shrugged. Best decide soon. One of you is needed up here, and another down there. The giant clansman shook his head. Southerners are fucked if both of you come back. Roost the fourth. Rose was ready to dig his knife into the throat of the next person who spoke. Currently, he and his remaining commanders were sat in the great hall of the Dread Fort, trying to figure out what their next step was. He had 4,000 men, the bulk of which were men from the Dread Fort, reinforced by men from High Point and Carehold. They had enough supplies thanks to Ramsay raiding Manderley and Hornwood lands, but they still only had half as many men as the Northern Army, which had just wiped out Reswell's host at Eagle's Roost. "We could retreat," Led Whitehill offered stupidly. "Where?" Arnulf growled. "Speak before you think." Led's face somehow grew redder than it already was, as he moved his considerable bulk out of his chair. But a glare from Rose stopped the action. The fat lord of High Point slowly sat back down, holding tongue much to Rose's relief. "We can march out and meet them," Ramsay offered. "Catch them while they're on the march." "They're marching to relieve Deepwood Motte," Rose replied. "Do you know the Wolfswood?" Ramsay shook his head. "Then shut up," Rose snapped. "Galbart Glover knows those woods better than anyone. We won't sneak up on them. It's better than sitting here on our asses," Ramsay said angrily. Rose regarded with a cold glare. "You're free to leave when you want. Take that filthy excuse for a soldier with you. But I wouldn't expect any hospitality from the Northern Army. They'll take your head, not that you use it." Ramsay seethed in his seat, but held his tongue. Rose knew that it grated on him when he was treated like a bastard, but Joffrey was soon to be dead, and his letter legitimizing Ramsay into a true Bolton no longer mattered, as the boy king would be king no longer as soon as Robb Stark got his hands on him. Their meeting was interrupted by the sudden arrival of Steelshanks, who looked paler than usual and looked as if he had seen a ghost. It was an expression Rose had never seen from his captain before. "You better be here to tell me that the sellswords have agreed to join my forces," Rose grumbled. Steelshanks shook his head. "Ned Stark is alive." Ramsay glared at the man. "Are you stupid?" Steelshanks shook his head again. He was with the company of the Rose. "He's alive and back in the north." Roost gazed at his captain. He had never lied before, nor had even been fearful of anything. He looked fearful right now. He looked downright terrified. And if Ned Stark was back in the north and seeking revenge, then there was good reason for all those around the table to be terrified. "You're sure it was Stark?" Rose asked. Steelshanks nodded. "Aye, my lord. It was the man in flesh and blood. Just as you are in front of me, so was he. And he's with the company of the Rose," Rose said. It was a statement, not a question. Steelshanks nodded. "Leave us," Rose commanded. Steelshanks bowed slightly and left as quickly as he had entered. When he was gone, the table sunk further into stunned silence. Arnulf and Ludd looked ready to shit themselves with fear, while Ramsay looked somewhat amused. "We're fucked," Arnulf whispered. "We still have his wife," Ramsay argued. Arnulf glared at the bastard. "Have you ever met the man? Do you know what he does to traitors?" Ramsay shrugged. "Why does that matter? He's not his son." "Who do you think taught the fucking man?" Arnulf roared weakly. "Do not forget, Ned Stark tore down the Targaryens, and they had the armies of the Reach and Dorne. He fought Arthur fucking Dane." Arnulf had risen partially out of his seat, his fear fueling his anger. Ludd was still glaring at the tabletop, probably still processing what he had just heard with his pea-sized brain, and Ramsay looked unimpressed. It didn't matter how much the other men bickered. Rose had already made up his mind. He would throw every last one of his men at the Starks, then head to the wall with his knife, firmly pressed against Catelyn Stark's neck, where he would kill her before taking the Black. Ned Stark's precious honor would never allow him to kill a brother of the Night's Watch. Not even the man who killed his wife. "What's done is done," Rose said, ending the argument between Ramsay and Arnulf. "We'll dig in here and make them pay dearly if they try to take the castle." Ramsay nodded excitedly, the mad glint in his eye, even more noticeable. Rose always knew that his bastard was a bit off, but like Tywin in the Mountain, he was Rose's mad dog to unleash when needed. And he would unleash the mad bastard on the Starks. He wasn't sure how, but he would. Line break. "Osha!" The wilding woman gazed out over the snow-covered land, watching as commoners struggled to haul their harvest through the snow towards the castle. But Osha had to give them credit. They struggled day after day to bring in their harvest, fighting against the elements to ensure that they had the supplies needed to live through the winter, which was continuing to draw closer and closer. It had been a rather wild time since Osha had entered the crypts of Winterfell, leaving Theon Turncloak and Lady Stark behind to face the army outside the walls. Together, the small group of Luwin, Hodor, the two Reed children, Bran, Rickon, and the two direwolves had hidden in the crypts while Winterfell was put to the torch. They had been safe in the crypts, thankfully, eating the small amount of food that the traitor had supplied them while waiting for the fire above them to die out. When Osha had made sure that it was safe, the group finally emerged from the crypts. The decision of what to do after was easy. Head north. On the way, Mira and Osha had supplied the group with food, catching rabbits and other small creatures. Luwin, who had emerged from the crypts with a satchel of books, had managed to walk a day before he became too weak to walk. That's when Osha had taken over carrying the man. He remained barely conscious during the journey, but came awake for the last time when the group camped in the ruins of an old holdfast on the shores of a lake. Osha wasn't sure what he did, but the old man had weirdly found the strength to stagger off with his books, and was gone for almost an hour before he returned, falling fast asleep as soon as he could. It was not a sleep he rose from. The old man died in his sleep that night. Mira and Osha had dug a grave for the old man on a hill about half a mile from the stronghold. Mira's brother had said a small prayer to the old gods, with Bran and Rickon adding their own sentiments, before the grave had been filled and the group had continued north. It was just after they reached a river called the Last River, which was a stupid name because there were rivers north of the wall, where things went bad. That's where the group had split up, much to Osha's objections. Bran said that he was drawn north, past the wall. He kept saying that he needed to learn to fly and other such nonsense. Osha had refused to let him go, but he, Hodor, and the Reed children had left during the night. Osha had wanted to go after them, but she had no idea how to follow them, because their prince had been covered by the snow. That's when she had given up and helped Rickon get to Last Hearth, home of the Umbers. It had been hard convincing the two stewards who she was, and what had happened. Thankfully, the child and direwolf helped her argument, and she and Rickon were placed under the protection of the Umbers. Osha had hoped that that would be the end of it. Then an army had appeared outside the castle, demanding that the Umbers join the Boltons. The two stewards had refused, holding to their oath of protecting Robb Stark's youngest brother. The siege hadn't lasted long, perhaps a month before the army had mysteriously disappeared. Now Osha was waiting to see what had happened. She had heard rumors that the Northern Army, led by Lord Stark's bastard, was back in the north and looking for revenge against the Boltons. Crowfoot and Horsebane had made it clear that they had no intention of going anywhere or sending their men, those that were left, anywhere until there was a clear power in the north. Osha, a small voice said from behind the wildling. Rickon had grown much since they left Winterfell, and even since he and Osha had come together almost a year ago. He had been around 4 name days when they had met. Now he was close to 6. His hair, curly auburn locks, had grown wild. He still had his baby fat, and his eyes, bright, curious, and blue, were full of confusion and sadness. Ever since his mother and older brother had left them to go to war, he had been confused as to why everyone was leaving. Even when his mother came back for a short while, she never spent any real time with the boy. Rickon's confusion and sadness got worse when Bran left and Luwin died. He was young, so he didn't understand, and since he didn't understand, he was afraid. "What are you doing out of bed, little pup?" Osha asked, picking up the child and bringing him back inside. The moon was now high in the sky, and she had put the boy to bed just as it was emerging. "I had bad dream," Rickon whimpered. Osha set the boy back in the best next to the curled form of his direwolf, pulling the blankets up around him. "What did you dream?" Osha asked. "I saw Bran," Rickon said quietly, his eyes shining with tears. "He was at a big wall. He's not coming back." Osha sighed, soothing the boy's hair. "Your brother has something he must do," she explained. "He will come back. Do you promise?" Osha nodded. "I promise, little pup. Now sleep." Rickon nodded and closed his eyes. Osha went to leave when she heard the little pup's voice. When she reached the door. "You won't leave?" Rickon asked, his little head just above the wolf's sleeping body. Osha locked eyes with the child. "I swear it on the old gods. And the new." Line break. Eddard. Rallying the mountain clans had gone faster than even Ned thought possible. Within a few days he had a host of 1,000 clansmen ready to march and fight. Many of the chieftains whom Ned hadn't seen in years had come as well. answering Ned's call to help him defeat the Boltons. Brandon Norrie, Torrin Little, Flints, Burleys, Harclays, Knots, even old Torgon Flint had arrived with his 2 sons and his men. All the leaders of the 7 strongest clans had answered the call, as well as 30 other clans had arrived at Buchan ready to fight then and there. Now Ned rode at the front of the army with Arya at his side, followed by Serio and the chieftains. The clansmen were just what Ned wanted. Each well over 2 meters tall, towering warriors of fur, leather, and muscle. Most wore toughened leather armor that usually left their arms bare. They wielded iron axes and swords that looked like toys in their hands. Ned knew that they were ferocious fighters, having seen them firsthand during Robert's rebellion. Bolton's men were in for a fright. Now Ned and his small army were marching south towards Winterfell. He knew that once Jon took care of Roswell's host at Eagle's Roost, he would continue north and retake Deepwood Motte, or at least send a portion of his host to save the Glovers' home. Ned meant to meet up with the host when it began to march west, where it was bound to march close to Winterfell. Was he right? Arya asked suddenly. Ned looked over at his daughter. Was who right? Wow. Ned raised an eyebrow. Was he right about what? Arya pulled an annoyed face. He said during the feast that either you or Robb had to stay in the south. Was he right? Ned nodded slowly, understanding her question. She wasn't wrong, because of how the war had shaped out, and the responsibility that Robb now had. There was no way Robb could return to the north, and not have war break out behind him as people try to sit their asses on that blasted iron chair. Hugo was unfortunately right. Either Ned or Robb had to stay in the south and rule as king. The obvious choice was Robb. He had been the one who the other kingdoms had rallied around. He had been the one named king by the North and Riverlands originally. And truth be told, he was thriving in the south like Ned never could. He also had the support of the Tyrells who seemed adept in the games played in the south. They would help Robb navigate them. He was, Ned answered finally. I wish he weren't, but that's the situation we're in. Robb's not coming back, is he? Arya said sadly. Ned glanced at his daughter, once again amazed at how astute she was. She saw life for how it was, an unfortunate truth. Sansa could be a little naive, and trusting at times. Arya could be naive at times as well, but she also was able to realize things that other girls, other children, her age wouldn't. Ned shook his head. That's a conversation for another time, child. Once we're finished here, I mean to march south and meet with Robb. There are many things that need to be discussed. Jon looked at Ep9. Jon and his commander met in the great hall of Eagle's Roost. On his left were the captains of the Company of the Rose, with Darren Stark sitting at Jon's left. On his right was Howland Reed and the rest of the Northern Lords, who had arrived the day before. Now the Northern Army was assembled once again, but they wouldn't be for long. Lord Glover, what have the scouts reported? Jon asked. The Ironborn ships have been destroyed. Glover responded with grim satisfaction. I reckon there can't be more than a few hundred of the iron fuckers left. Jon's next step in freeing the north was to retake Deepwood Motte, the last remaining castle in the north still under Ironborn control. The scouts found the burning wreckage of the Ironborn longships. Now, the remaining invaders were holed up inside the Glover castle with no chance of escaping. Jon nodded. There's no point sending the entire army north. Lord Glover, you and the Company of the Rose shall head north and retake your home. Jon glanced at Darren, who nodded easily. We're more than happy to assist Lord Glover. What about the rest of us? Lord Umber grumbled. We're going after Bolton. Jon replied firmly. My father should have assembled the mountain clans by now. We'll march west and hopefully meet up with him along the way. Lord Reed, has there been any word from the Dreadfort? Howland shook his head. My friends say that there has been little activity at the Dreadfort since Arnulf's and the Bastard's men returned to the castle. The Lord of Greywater Watch said, I suspect Roose means to hold where he is and try to inflict as many casualties as possible. How many men does he have? Roland Hawker asked. About 4,000, Howland answered. He also has the supplies to hold out against a siege. His bastard has looted villages from White Harbor to Last Hearth. We'll deal with details when we reach the castle, Jon said. All we need to know is that Roose has a sizable host and supplies. The men and women in the room nodded, accepting the facts. Jon looked around the room for a moment before bringing the war council to a close. Darren Lord Glover, you leave on the morrow. The rest of the Northern Army will do the same. Jon said, standing up. Once Deepwood Motta has been retaken, march east towards the Dreadfort. That is all for today. The others nodded and began to leave. Jon caught Howland's eye and motioned for him to follow. Jon, as they walked out of the hall and out into the courtyard, they walked up the battlements on the western wall that faced the harbor. Already, the citizens were hard at work repairing their town. Many fishing boats were out in the harbor, finding food for the survivors. Others were helping rebuild homes or care for the wounded. They had hidden their homes through most of the siege, and looked just as thin and gaunt as many of the surviving defenders. Many of their homes had been looted by Reeswell's men, and they had starved just as much as Bowden Hawker and his men. Rolland and his family had all taken part in rebuilding the town, assisting their people with anything they might need, and attending the wounded at least 3 times a day. It was clear that the Hawkers cared for their people as much as their people cared for them. "How is Robb?" Jon asked, leaning against the stonework. "He's well. He's met up with the forces of the Vale and is currently a league outside King's Landing," Howland answered. "Is there anything I should know?" Jon asked. "Joffrey is no longer in power," Howland said. "The Targaryens have returned to Westeros." Jon frowned. "What do you mean they've returned?" Howland shrugged. "Long story, but they have and also have an army of sellswords, with them as well as the men of Dorne." "Have they attacked Robb?" Howland shook his head. "Not to my knowledge. There are still many unknowns about the Targaryens that my cousin and I are working on finding out. Unfortunately, the Spider is one of their allies, and so getting information from the capital at the moment is tough." "Why didn't you let the council know?" "What's the point?" Howland answered with a shrug. "As I told you before, I give information as it becomes needed. What is the purpose of letting the others know that the Targaryens have arrived when we're still fighting the Boltons?" Howland shook his head. "No, King Robb is already at the capital, and will be fine." "Fine," Jon grumbled. "I hope you're right." Howland crossed his arms. "Jon, be realistic. We're here and Robb is in the south. It would take us months to reach him. What can we do?" "Nothing," Jon answered quietly. "Exactly." Howland agreed. "Do not worry about your brother. He'll be just fine. Right now, we have a Leech Lord to kill. Let's focus on him then. We can focus on the crazier half of your family." Jon managed a small smile. "I liked you better when you were the strong and silent type." "Your father said the same thing to me." Howland grunted. "Oh well, too late to go back now." Line break. As Jon approached the small camp, his eyes were locked on Winterfell, the ruins of his former home. It tore at his heart to see the stronghold in such a state, but even in ruins it still remained the beating heart of the North. For the first time, Jon felt that the Ironborn phrase rang true. What is dead may never die, but rises again harder and stronger. Winterfell would be returned to its former glory in time. But at the moment, Jon wanted nothing more than to see Roose Bolton and his bastard pay for their crimes. There was a man waiting for Jon and his companions at the edge of the clansman camp. He was slightly built, but there was an innate slyness to the man, reminding Jon oddly of a fox. The younger man next to him looked to be his son, as the 2 men shared many similarities. The shield carried by the younger man bore green thistles on a field of yellow. "Jon Snow," the old man greeted. "We have been waiting for you." Jon nodded to the man. "Thank you, Lord." "Narri." "Brandon Narri," the old man answered. "This is my son, Brandon the Younger." Jon nodded to the younger men. "Thank you for meeting us." Jon was accompanied by the members of Robb's battle guard and his commanders. They all dismounted as men came forward to take their mounts. It was obvious that Lord Norrie and his son meant to lead Jon and the others to his father. "My cousin Owen rode with the young wolf," Brandon the Younger said as the group walked through the camp. "I do not see him among you." Jon glanced behind, seeing the same regretful expression that he now wore. "Owen died at Mokil Cleanse," he explained. "He was a great man and warrior." "He died fighting," Brandon the Younger said. "That is good." Jon raised an eyebrow, but decided to leave the topic alone. It was most likely a superstition or honor held by the mountain clansmen. But Owen had died honorably, fighting shoulder to shoulder with his friends. There were worse ways to go out. The group finally made it to the large tent in the center of the camp. It was guarded by two big hairy men who were garbed in leather and fur armor, each holding spears and shields. The banner outside the tent was the gray dire wolf of House Stark. "The Ned is right inside," Lord Norrie said. "He is anxious to see you." "As is the girl," Brandon the younger added. Jon nodded, not enjoying the tight knot in his stomach. It was weird that he was anxious about seeing his father again. He should have been overjoyed. "Thank you, my lord," Jon said. The two men nodded and left without another word. Jon marched towards the tent, preparing himself as he ducked in, his eyes quickly adjusting to the darker lighting. There was a cot off to one side, but the center of the tent was dominated by a table that held a map of the north. There were two people inside, a girl sitting on the cot and an older man leaning over the table. As soon as Jon stepped inside, the girl raced across the tent and practically threw herself at Jon, throwing her arms around him. "Jon!" Arya cried. Jon held his youngest sister, trying not to let tears escape. He crouched slightly so that they were at the same height. Neither of them wanted to release each other, and no one wanted to break up the moment between brother and sister. Finally, and almost painfully, Jon pulled back so that he could look at Arya. Her eyes were red-rimmed, as his probably were. She looked taller and more fit than the last time he had seen her. But she still had that proud, energetic look in her eye and wore a smile brighter than the sun. She was dressed in leather breeches and a jerkin over a white woolen shirt. She also wore a short fur cape. Lady Stark would have been outraged about how Arya wasn't dressed like a lady, but to Jon she looked amazing. She looked like Arya, if there was ever a way to put it. At her side was a thin, needle-like sword that Jon recognized instantly. "You've grown," Jon said softly, his words full of love and wonder. "You still have the sword." Arya laughed and pulled out the sword, holding it in both hands. "I still have it," she said happily. Neither of them truly had the words to express how they were feeling, so they settled for simply staring at each other and smiling like lunatics. Besides Robb, Arya was the other sibling Jon was close with. She always treated him like one of the family, regardless of what her mother thought, and unlike her mother, Jon had encouraged her wild side to an extent. That's why he had given her needle. "I'm so glad you're alive," Arya said quietly, hugging Jon once more. "I'm glad you're fighting for your family." Jon choked up slightly. He held her tight for a few more moments, before letting her go and getting up, locking eyes with his father. The older man had a mixture of emotions on his face, but none stood out more than pride. He looked proud of Jon, more so than he ever had. "Father," Jon said, covering the distance between them in a few short steps. His father moved forward as well, and soon the two men embraced happily in the middle of the tent. Jon was now struggling to keep the tears from his face, but he managed. After a few more moments, the two men took a step back and regarded one another, just as Jon had done with Arya. They were closer to the same height, but father looked a little different. His hair was still worn long, and his beard was closely trimmed, but there was a certain gleam in his gray eyes that were as dark as stone. It was a look that Jon had seen whenever father dealt with criminals who had committed heinous crimes. He was dressed for war in plated leather and steel plate, looking every inch as fearsome as Robb had when Jon had been reunited with him at River Run. Over one shoulder, Jon noticed the hilt of ice, the Valyrian steel greatsword that had been used by the head of House Stark for generations. To put it plainly, Jon's father looked ready for war. Words cannot express. Father began before glancing over Jon's shoulder and looking at the others. "We will talk soon. I promise." Jon nodded, knowing that his father, like Arya, wasn't great with words. They would talk later, and they had a lot to talk about. But now his father had to be Eddard Stark, the Lord of Winterfell, not Eddard Stark the father. Jon let go of his father, who was immediately crushed by a bear hug from the Great Don, then another from Maggie Mormont. He then endured a few firm handshakes and quick embraces from Rickon Karstark and Roland Hawker, before coming face to face with Howland Reed. The two men gazed at each other before father eventually smiled and clasped arms with his longtime friend. "Gods above, Ned," the Greatson laughed. "You gave us a fucking fright." Father smiled. "I heard that Cersei faked my death. I am sorry that you all thought I was dead for so long." "You're alive, and Roast must be shitting himself." Lord Karstark chuckled. "Your boy here, and the king as well, has been doing you proud." Jon locked eyes with his father and was rewarded again with a look of fierce pride. John blushed slightly and looked away. He felt a hand take his and he found Arya at his side, looking at him with the same look their father had given him. I am beyond proud of both Jon and Robb, father answered. They've achieved more than I have ever dreamed of. I honestly didn't think the sellswords were telling the truth, Meg admitted, but I'm happy to be wrong for the first time. Father grinned and looked over at the group of young nobles who stood in the entrance of the tent. They looked a little uncomfortable, but all had grins on their faces as they watched their parents reunite with Lord Stark. Eddard Stark, is that you? Father asked, picking out Lord Rickard's son. Eddard bowed slightly. My lord, it's amazing to see you again. Father continued to greet every one of Jon's friends. Darren, Brandon, Ian, Sarah Wendell. They all responded with my lord and beaming smiles as they were recognized by their liege lord. The last to be greeted was Roderick Forrester. Roderick, how's your father, Gregor? Father asked. Roderick looked a little surprised that he had been remembered. He nodded quickly. My father is doing great, my lord. He's currently in the south, leading the Northmen under the king. I hope to see Gregor again, Father said. He's a great man. He is, my lord. Roderick agreed, a giant smile on his face. I am happy to see you all, Father said, addressing everyone in the tent now. Tonight we will feast and celebrate like friends should, but right now I would like nothing more than a moment alone with my son. The others all nodded and filed out of the tent, with the Grayton bringing up the rear. He's definitely your son, Ned, he said before leaving. When they were alone, Jon turned back to his father, not sure what to say. There was so much running through his mind that he wasn't sure where to start. Before he could say anything, his father held up a hand to stop him. Arya, how about you go be with Sariel? Father said, looking at his daughter. Jon and I must talk alone. But I want to talk with him too, Arya said sadly. We'll talk tonight, Jon said. I promise. Arya glanced between her father and brother before nodding. She gave Jon a final hug as she left. When she was gone, Father poured 2 tankards of what looked like ale, gesturing for Jon to take one. I'm sure you have a lot of questions, Father started, but I think there is a conversation that I have to have with you that's long overdue. You mean who my mother is? Jon said slowly. Father nodded. You have a right to know, and I'm not sure what might happen in the coming weeks. There's no certainty in war, and the last thing I want to do is leave without telling you the truth. Jon knew that by leave his father meant die. It's okay, Jon said. Lord Reed already told me. Jon's father rarely looked surprised, but this was one of the times that he was. It was a subtle look that was only noticeable because his eyebrow raised a little higher than normal. Did he? Father said. I suppose it makes sense. I was disposed and Howland always thought you had a right to know. Jon nodded slowly. That was his reasoning. You were a prisoner of the Lannisters, and I was passing through the Neck on my way to be with Robb. He told me the whole story of how my real parents met, what my father did, and who I really am. He also told me why you never told me and the implications of what might happen if others knew. Father looked almost sad. How do you feel? Jon sighed. I didn't know what to feel at first. There's no way to prepare to hear something like that. I have accepted that I know who my parents are, but I do not acknowledge them as my parents. Father's head snapped to attention. What do you mean? I do not hate who my parents really are, but they didn't raise me. Jon explained. You're my father. That's not going to change. I don't care if I'm still acknowledged as your bastard or not. I'd rather be your bastard than the son of Rhaegar Targaryen. Father gave Jon a sad but proud smile. You won't be a bastard for long, Jon. If I know Robb like I think I do, he'll make you a Stark. I'm surprised he hasn't already. He technically has, Jon said. I had a will drawn up before he marched off to face Tywin. If he were to die, I would become Jon Stark and take up his crown. But you continue to go as Jon Snow, Father noted. Jon nodded. It seems simpler that way. I'm not sure why, but it just is. Father nodded. Who else knows? Besides you, myself, and Lord Reed. Just Samwell and Robb. Jon answered. Samwell Tarley traveled with me when I left the Wall, and was there when Lord Reed told me the news. He's my friend, and he would never betray me. I told Robb when I met him at River Run. Did Howland give you anything else? Jon nodded and pulled the sheathed sword from his side, placing it on the table and pulling the blade slightly from his scabbard. He told me that this was found at the tower. Blackfire, father said. I'm still wondering why Rhaegar never used it against Robert. It's not the only Valyrian steel sword I had, Jon said. The Maester at Castle Black, once Aemon Targaryen, gave me Dark Sister. I didn't know why at the time. Now it makes a little more sense. And where is it now? Father asked. Robb wields it, but it's called Claw now. This is Frost, Jon said. We didn't think it was smart to call them by their actual names. Aye, that's true, Father said. Jon, I am sorry that you've had to live your life as a bastard. Howland's told me time and again that you had no right to go to the Wall. As for how Cat treated you, I don't hate Lady Catelyn, Father, Jon said. I know why she was the way that she was, and I know why you behaved like you did. I know how King Robert felt about Targaryens and your sister. You don't have to explain anything to me. Father smiled slightly and moved forward, clapping Jon on the shoulder. Cat asked me years ago to send you away, but I couldn't. You look so much like Lyanna, you were all I had left of her, yet you so much like Rhaegar at the same time. I meant what I said earlier. You and Robb, words cannot explain, just how proud I am of both of you, the men you've grown to be. I made a lot of mistakes that led to this bloody mess, and I am sorry that you've been the ones who have had to be the ones to fix it. Jon struggled to find anything after his father's honesty. It was so unusual to have a parent admit to their child that they were wrong, and it made Jon feel awkward. He knew that he had to say something. You did what you thought was best, Father, Jon said finally. That is the first thing you taught Robb, me, and the others. You don't have to apologize to us. I have to, Jon, Father continued. I have much to make up for. But first, the Boltons must be dealt with. Father picked up Frost, weighing it in his hands. So, White Wolf, would you mind fighting beside an old man? Jon smiled and placed one hand on the hilt of the sword. I will always fight beside my family. Father matched Jon's smile. Then let us show the Boltons that winter is coming.